This is the Committee on Finance for today, Friday, April 30th. I understand that state law currently requires that the following announcement be made at the beginning of every remote public hearing as follows. Due to the current public health emergency, City Council committees are currently meeting remotely. We are using Microsoft Teams to make these remote hearings possible. Instructions for how the public may view and offer public testimony and public hearings of council committees are included in the public hearing notices that are published in Daily News, Philadelphia Inquirer, and the Legal Intelligentsia prior to the hearings, and can also be found on phlcouncil.com. I now note that the hour has come to begin this hearing. Will the clerk please call the roll to take attendance? Members that are in attendance, will you please indicate that you are present when your name is called, as well as say a few words so that your picture and image can be displayed on screen when you speak, to make sure that you have a microphone check for the court reporter.
Councilmember Cindy Bass.
Good morning. I am present. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and colleagues and citizens of Philadelphia.
Good morning.
Morning.
Councilmember Alan Dom.
Good morning, Chairman Green. Good morning, Frank, and good morning, colleagues.
Good morning.
Councilmember Helen Gim.
Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Council Chair.
Good morning.
I'm present.
Councilmember Bobby Heenan.
Good morning, Chairman, and good morning, colleagues.
Good morning.
Councilmember Curtis Jones Jr.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Philadelphia.
Good morning.
Councilmember Mark Squilla.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, colleagues. I'm present.
Good morning.
And Chair Derek Green.
And I am present. Good morning to everyone who is here, to my colleagues, and to the viewing public, as well as the witnesses as scheduled to testify this morning. I would like to thank the clerk, Mr. Iannuzzi. Quorum of the committee is present, and this hearing is now called to order. This is the public hearing of the Committee on Finance regarding Bill number 210203 and Resolution number 210191. Mr. Iannuzzi, will you please read the titles of the title of the bill?
Bill number 210203, an ordinance authorizing and approving the execution and delivery of one or more service agreements between the City of Philadelphia and the Philadelphia Redevelopment Authority, and/or one or more other city-related authorities relating to the financing of a neighborhood preservation initiative, which includes housing, commercial corridors, and neighborhood infrastructure programs, etc., all under terms and conditions.
Thank you. Before we begin to hear testimony from the witnesses we have here for today, everyone who has been invited to the meeting to testify should be aware that this public hearing is being recorded. Because the hearing is public, participants and viewers should have no reasonable expectation of privacy. By continuing to participate in this hearing, you are consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to recognizing members for questions or comments that they have for witnesses, I will note for the record at this time that we will use the chat feature available on Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they wish to be recognized. In order to comply with the Sunshine Act, the chat feature must only be used for this purpose and be used by members only. Before I call the clerk to call the first panel for bill number 210203, are there any opening comments prior to our first panel? Seeing and hearing none, Mr. Iannuzzi, will you please call the first panel we have to testify this morning on bill number 210203?
Jackie Dunn, City Treasurer.
Sure. Good morning.
Okay. Good morning, Treasurer Dunn. I see you're connected, and please state your name for the record and then proceed with your testimony.
Sure. Good morning, Chairperson Green and members of the Finance Committee. My name is Jacqueline Dunn, and I am the City Treasurer. Here with me today are Natalia Dominguez Buckley, First Deputy City Treasurer, and Matthew Bowman, Sinking Fund Executive Director, and we are here to testify in support of Bill 210203 and its amendments. Bill 210203 would authorize the city and the Philadelphia Redevelopment Authority, or PRA, and/or one or more city-related authorities to finance the city's Neighborhood Preservation Initiative, or NPI, a program to address longstanding inequities in underserved communities across the city. The bonds would be issued at an aggregate amount of up to $400 million, outstanding plus the related cost of issuance, credit enhancement, and discount. The bonds would be secured by the city's obligation under the service agreement to budget and appropriate annually amounts necessary to pay the service fee, which would be sufficient to pay debt service on the outstanding bonds. The bond proceeds would be used to finance programs to improve and enhance housing, small business, commercial corridors, and neighborhood infrastructure within the city in order to promote the health, welfare, and safety of the residents of the city, prevent and eliminate blight, and encourage the provision of healthy homes, a decent living environment, and adequate places of employment for residents of the city through redevelopment, renewal, rehabilitation, housing, conservation, urban beautification, and/or commercial section and neighborhood development activities. As discussed, our intention is to issue the bonds in several tranches, and this initial transaction would have a par amount of approximately $100 million. This concludes my testimony, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Ms. Dunn. So my understanding that based on your testimony that the Neighborhood Preservation Initiative will be done through four different tranches of about $100 million each.
We would be issuing multiple transactions under this ordinance. The first transaction would be approximately $100 million. And I think the size and the timing of future issuances would really depend on the needs and the pace of spend of the first transaction.
Right. But the total amount was $400 million, and then the three subsequent transactions will be based on the spending and the available projects and needs under the program statement for the Neighborhood Preservation Initiative.
Yes, correct.
And then could you provide some perspective? I know in the past when we've had financing, you provide information on the type of professionals that you have used historically in the Treasurer's Office. Can you give some perspective on the nature of the professionals you anticipate using for this type of borrowing?
Sure. So the lead underwriter on this transaction is Seifert Williams Shank, and they are a certified MWDBE, and the co-senior is PNC.
Okay. And then also from a legal professionals or any other professionals, don't think you'll be engaged in FA on this type of transaction, but I'm curious in reference to what type of counsel that will be used as part of this transaction as well.
Sure. So for bond counsel, we have two counsels, Ahmad Zafries and Cozen O'Connor. For disclosure counsel, we use Hawkins, Delafield, and Wood and Ann Leibowitz on this transaction. And then for financial advisors, we use PFM and Acacia. And Acacia is a woman-owned firm.
Right. I didn't realize you were going to have an FA on this. Okay. Thank you very much. I see Councilmember Jones has both raised his hand on Microsoft Teams and indicated a question in the chat feature. So you must have a burning question this morning.
No, not at all. Just some questions, Mr. Chair, to put on the record. We have used kind of general, broad categories to do this financing, but I'd like to drill down for a second. We are talking about infrastructure repair as well, preservation as well. I have two examples of that. I have retaining walls in the 4th District, like in other areas of the city of Philadelphia that are in a state of disrepair. Are we talking about the ability to repair some of these aging infrastructure walls that are reaping havoc on home ownership in Philadelphia?
So this transaction does include funding for a program to address infrastructure needs, including dangerous retaining walls. And we're also I should have mentioned, also joined by colleagues from the from Planning and Development, from Otis, and from Commerce to help answer questions in more detail on the actual program uses of the proceeds. And so they're also available today.
Okay. And feel free, if the chairman allows, them to answer after their testimony, but I wanted to put on that question on the record. And secondly, I am in the 4th District, plagued like other areas with multi-unit structures, apartments that have seen better days and have been, in effect, not treated well by ownership. And sometimes they develop serious L&I violations and things like that. And one of the issues that we were grappling with is how to make said repairs in advance and put those major properties, put liens on them so that they don't get away with walking away scot-free and causing homelessness, in particular for our seniors around the city. So I don't think you have that specific level of detail, but I have plenty of imagination on how to spend that first 100 million. And I wanted to put that, Mr. Chairman, on the record to give some sense to the citizens that we want to use this money in addition to some of the relief money that is coming from Washington to do good in our districts. So if you could speak on that a little bit under the preservation part, that would be helpful. If not, that's okay.
Thank you, Councilmember Jones. With the chair's permission, I would like to allow the planning development colleagues to speak more to that.
No problem. If a member of the Planning Commission that is here to testify, please come on screen and state your name for the record and then proceed with giving comments. Is there anyone else from the administration that can provide additional information in that regard?
Sure. This is Greg Heller from PHDC. So housing preservation is a really important part of what these proceeds will be used for. And there are several line items in here that relate to preservation of affordable housing. And that includes investing funds to rehabilitate existing projects in the way that the city traditionally uses. Affordable preservation funds. And there's also a line item to allow us to acquire expiring projects and make sure that we can preserve their affordability. We've certainly had conversations with you, Councilman Jones, and with other council members about properties in their district that were at risk of going market rate. And it would have been nice to have this type of funding in the past to try and do a workout or acquire them or work with a partner to try and get them into ownership of somebody who would maintain them for long-term affordability. So these bond proceeds will finally give us the ability to do some of that, as well as our traditional work investing in rehabbing properties for preservation purposes. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Chairman Green, just to give you some insight, there are properties located a couple of blocks off of City Avenue that have grown in value, but have been disinvested in, primarily occupied by senior citizens, people with mobility issues, and it has become very attractive to outside investors that figure if they don't invest in things like sprinkler systems, elevators, major systems repair, that we will do the dirty work for them by condemning these buildings and putting hundreds of individuals out, and then they can sink money in, rehab it, and then make it market rate. But thanks to the Redevelopment Authority, thanks to City Council and this particular fund, we're not falling for the banana in the tailpipe joke and putting our own people out into at-risk homeless situations. So thank you, Mr. Heller, for putting that on the record for us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you, Councilmember Jones. Also, as just a point of information, my understanding is that the program statement will also be part of our consolidated plan hearing, which will also be part of the Finance Committee, similar as we've done in years past when we have the consolidated plan, which includes other federal funding like home dollars and community development block grant dollars that will come in front of the Finance Committee. And my understanding is that the program statement will be a part of that, similar to how we had the Neighbor Transformation Initiative during the street administration, where we had a program statement for the dollars that were used for NTI, the dollars that were used for NPI, or Neighbor Preservation Initiative, which is before us today for financing, will be part of that. And also, there's a possibility as we go forward in the year and as additional guidance comes to us from HUD regarding guidelines on how dollars can be spent through the American Rescue Plan, there may be additional amendments to that program statement. As you may know, that the federal government's fiscal year does not start until October 1. And also, as we are going as a nation through conversations regarding the American Jobs Plan and President Biden's discussion regarding not just traditional infrastructure, but other types of infrastructure that, if it does get passed, will probably be passed through reconciliation, which will also occur in the fall and may also provide some opportunities for changes to the program statement. With that, I will now recognize Councilmember Dom for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, Treasurer Dunn. I wanted to ask you a question on, we have a lot of, when we borrow money, what is the typical time frame it takes us to put that money in play?
Sure. Good morning, Councilmember Dom. For tax-exempt borrowings, we're required by federal tax law to make expenditures of those dollars within 36 months, and there's also other timeframes along the way. So, for example, you have to have the first 5% contracted to spend within 6 months, for example. And so it's a very concise time frame that we work towards. With taxable borrowings, we have more flexibility, so there's no federal tax pressures, but we certainly want to wait to borrow until we're ready to spend, just so we don't encumber additional debt service costs before we're ready to put that money to work.
And do we have any borrowings right now that we borrowed the money and we haven't really utilized the funds?
So we have a couple more recent borrowings where the spending is still in progress. And so Rebuild, for example, is working to spend down those dollars. We did a previous taxable borrowing for Restore, Repair, Renew, and they're also working hard to put those dollars to work. And so there are a couple programs where those dollars are currently being used.
While we're waiting for the use of those dollars, we're paying the interest on the money, I assume.
We're paying the debt service, correct?
Is there any suggestions you have on how we could speed up the implementation or tighten the period of when we borrowed to when we actually put it in play?
So I think on the front end, we work with departments to make sure that everything is ready to go. They have pipeline in place or projects in place. They know exactly what they need to requisition the funds so that everyone's ready to go once we actually price and close and receive the funding. And we also work particularly with innovative programs to really make sure we build in some flexibility within the ordinance. We work with bond counsel. We work with the program users to really understand, all of the different ways they may want to use the money. So we build in maximum flexibility to allow us to be able to pivot or adjust as, programs are rolling out, and we, have some early lessons learned particularly for a new program.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Dom. I'd like to recognize now Councilmember Gim. Councilmember Gim. I believe Councilmember Gim had a question, but I see she is not available at this point. Are there any other witnesses on this panel other than Ms. Dunn from the administration? Okay, seeing none, are there any other questions from members of council for this witness? Also seeing none, but Ms. Dunn.
Council Chair, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was trying to, I am unfortunately not able to get into Teams through my traditional route, so I apologize for all of that. I just wanted to, first of all, thank you very much, Council Chair. I appreciate it. So for some of the witnesses, I just wanted to check in about bindingness, because I think that's one of the questions that we had. How binding are the documents that are submitted, and is there, for example, opportunity to, like, be flexible within, or how flexible is the language? Can it be, or how much do the exhibits, for example, bind us to the actual things that are written in them?
Sure. Good morning, Councilmember Gim.
Good morning.
The ordinance, the service agreement, and the program descriptions are, we draft them with as much flexibility as we're able to allow within state law. So the law that governs, for example, our ability to issue debt through a service agreement with the Redevelopment Authority in this case, as well as tax law. And we have to work within those guidelines, but we do work to make the actual permissible spending within the programs as flexible as possible. So, for example, you'll see, several permitted uses with the or mentioned, and so we can pivot or adjust within the program as we refine a newer program, for example. Does that help answer your question?
A bit. So I think under, like, for example, the eviction diversion program, which is a little bit more specific and talks about housing counselors, could that be expanded to include just general legal services supports as well?
So I think that would be a question I would take back to bond counsel to ask, to work with them and flesh out what permissible uses we might be looking to include within that specific program. And so I'm happy to talk, outside of the hearing if you'd like on those questions. And we also have bond counsel on now, and I could ask them if you have more specifics that you'd like to walk through.
I guess one question is, would it be, if we felt like that's at all a possibility, would it just be safer to add small language around that to ensure that there was no confusion or limitation?
Sure. And so with the chair's permission, if I may ask bond counsel, we have Suzanne Mays on the line, I believe.
No problem. Ms. Mays, please state your name for the record before you provide testimony.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Suzanne Mays, and I'm a partner with the firm of Cozen O'Connor and serving as co-bond counsel on the bond issue. Councilman Gim, could you just give me a little further explanation of what you're thinking about in the eviction context, if you don't mind, please?
No, I generally think that we will resolve this, but part of the question that I have is how binding the language is, and whether it prohibits expansion of use unless it's like specifically delineated, if that makes sense. So for example, there might be language that says that if there's an identified specific program, it identifies funding for housing counselors, for housing counseling services, for tenants mediation services. Is that broad enough? Like, could it potentially include like legal services as written, or do you feel like if we were nervous about that, it's advisable to expand the language?
So I think that it's intentionally drafted quite broadly, and that there is flexibility to deal with a dynamic program within the confines of what is legal from a state and federal standpoint. So I do not think that you need to make a change here for that purpose if it falls within the very general category of housing, economic preservation and development in the kind of neighborhood setting as the total program is defined. And then what we could do, as Treasurer Dunn described, is just work with you outside of this process just to understand what you're thinking a little better and make sure that we don't see any state law impediments. But you'll see there's quite a bit of general language in the lead-in, and that is meant to be broad in scope.
Mhm.
Councilmember Gibb, I just have a point of
Yes.
clarification for Ms. Mays. I know in the past and I'm reflecting during the Neighbor Transformation Initiative, when we wanted to use dollars from NTI for individual private property, there was an issue in doing so only if it was a public safety issue. And that was the reason why we could not do driveways, but we could do retaining walls using NTI bond dollars on private property because it was a public safety issue. From the perspective of Neighbor Preservation Initiative, can bond dollars be used to provide goods or services to individuals?
It will depend in part on whether we are issuing tax exempt or taxably and the form of the dollars. But in general, if issuing taxably, there should be more flexibility to provide dollars for individual home repairs.
But even if using taxable dollars, taxable debt, you're saying for the record that those dollars can be spent on services or investments to individuals or on private property.
That's correct. Yes.
Thank you.
And yes. Councilman Gim, did I answer your question sufficiently that you're comfortable?
I think we're going to resolve it regardless, but I think it's helpful to know that in general your goal is for the language to be flexible. I think that the question is I think if this is and this is why I'm asking, like, how careful do we have to be about language? Because I think if it said eviction diversion, it could be fine, more than likely. But there is a very hyper-specific eviction diversion program that is very limited and separate from legal services work. So because the words are eviction diversion program, the question is program specific to the existing program that exists, which would be narrow, for example, as opposed to eviction diversion or other forms, or adding in like words around legal services. Would that make it just cautious for us so that we don't have to worry about how it's interpreted or that we're in any way limited?
I don't see a problem with adding language.
If there might be a need for clarification, is that correct?
Correct.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Gim. Are there any additional questions for this panel? Seeing none, however, there may be some additional questions that may come up following some of the other panels that testify. So if members of the administration could at least be available. At this point, I would like to have the chief clerk call the next panel to testify on this bill.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Will Gonzalez, Executive Director of SEBA, Kenneth Bigos, Executive Director of the Affordable Housing Centers of Pennsylvania, and Rick Sauer, Executive Director for the Philadelphia Association of Community Development Corporations.
Thank you, Mr. Iannuzzi. If we can go in that order, please state your name for the record, and then we'll have each witness testify in sequential order. And after the last witness testifies, we'll then take questions from members of the council. Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Please state your name for the record and then proceed.
Thank you, Councilman. Gracias for giving SEBA the opportunity to testify today. My name is Will Gonzalez. I'm the Executive Director of SEBA. SEBA's mission is to promote the economic development and financial inclusion of the Latino community through collaborations and advocacy aimed at ensuring access to quality housing for our community. Thank you, City Council, for your leadership in seeking ways to increase affordable housing in Philadelphia. We respectfully request that the neighborhood preservation initiatives investments be in addition to and not replace previous funding commitments from the city's general fund for affordable housing and community economic development. We also respectfully request that you maximize the impact of this bond initiative, maximize all facets of community and economic impact by prioritizing allocations to community-based nonprofit CDCs with a track record of developing affordable housing. SEBA's collective has the capacity, experience, and strength to maximize your impact. This collective includes some of the best CDCs in the city: APM, ASIC, Norris Square Community Alliance, Esperanza. The Latino community is ready to multiply the impact of these investments in terms of producing affordable housing in Eastern North Philadelphia, thanks to a collective agreement with the Philadelphia Housing Authority. That agreement transfers 240 properties to the 4 Latino CDCs of the collective. Those 240 PHA properties are in one of the most rapidly gentrifying neighborhoods of Eastern North Philadelphia. We also want to highlight that improving access to affordable housing is more than just brick and mortar. It includes strengthening the city's housing counseling capacity. We have a tale of two cities. We also have a crisis of not having enough housing counselors. We have low to moderate income families blessed with the possibility of buying their first home. Yet at the same time, you have many families facing foreclosure, eviction, urgent home repairs. Housing counselors are the frontline workers, and we need more of them to handle both sides of the increased demand for their services. Without more housing counselors, we will face a bottleneck in helping low to moderate income families access the help that they need in many fronts to stay housed. Please also ensure meaningful community input in the allocation process of the NPI bond funding. We want to make sure that we have access to data as to how the funds are spent and how equity goals are met. The bottom line is, if you want to see if we are making progress with equitable, affordable housing development, we must follow the carpenter's adage, measure twice to act once. We look forward to working with you on maximizing the positive impact of the neighborhood preservation initiative investments in our city. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. I'd just like to note for the record that we were also joined some moments ago by Councilmember David O. And Mr.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I was a little delayed in pressing my buttons. Thank you for the acknowledgement.
No problem. Mr. Bigos, please begin your testimony. Kenneth Bigos. Okay, we will wait to see if Mr. Bigos is.
Yes, sorry, I forgot to unmute.
No problem. No problem. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Yes. Good morning. My name is Kenneth Bigos. I'm the Executive Director of the Affordable Housing Centers of Pennsylvania. We're a DHCD housing counseling organization. I want to begin by thanking Chairman Green and members of the Finance Committee for permitting me to present my testimony today. My testimony is to discuss the indelible nature that housing counseling services will have to the city to achieve the goals outlined in the Neighborhood Preservation Initiative and the looming crisis, as Will Gonzalez just mentioned, as far as the resumption of mortgage foreclosures and evictions that will have once the moratoriums have been lifted. I also want to address the concerns about the proposed cuts in the Housing Trust Fund from $20 million to $6.86 million in the mayor's FY22 budget. First, I want to congratulate the city council members for their vision to establish the MPI. The plan is ambitious to support the precarious circumstances of Philadelphia neighborhoods and households. All of these housing initiatives outlined in the MPI, whether it's to restart the Philly First Home Grant or to support tenants facing eviction or foreclosure, require the mobilization of the DHCD housing counseling network to be successful. We serve as the advocates to help residents access these programs to achieve these goals. For a long time, City Council and DHCD have taken for granted the accessibility of housing counseling services. There's a good reason for that. For every major housing program that the city has created, which involves the housing counselors, it has been successful. Programs such as the Mortgage Diversion Program, the Owner-Occupied Payment Agreement, Philly First Home Grant, now the Eviction Diversion Program, are viewed as successes, some of which are seen as national models replicated by other municipalities. Most of these programs were unfunded mandates for housing counselors, and we have served more households without the funding support to increase the capacity. For example, with the Philly First Home Grant, COPA, my organization, provides counseling service to 33% more clients than we saw in the previous year. This fall, housing counselors will be even more overextended in addition to implementing the objectives of the MPI. Housing counselors will be assisting households avoid eviction and foreclosure as the moratoriums will most likely be lifted. Thankfully, relief for these distressed households is here and more is coming through the American Rescue Plan. Regardless, this will create a crisis capacity as demand for housing counseling services will spike. In addition to an increased demand for services, DHCD counseling agencies are in a tenuous position because on August the 1st, 2021, all housing counselors will have to receive their HUD certification to continue to provide services to clients. This mandate was enacted from the Dodd-Frank Act in 2010. This new certification rule will present a supply issue that will undermine Philadelphia residents' ability to access services to avoid eviction and foreclosure. We need the support of City Council to include housing counseling in existing workforce development programs to access qualified candidates. I implore the members of the City Council to recognize the housing crisis presented before us. Therefore, I urge to include the funding from the MPI funds to pay for some of the administrative and housing counseling services that will most likely be needed to address this crisis, as well as to advocate for the restoration of funds with the Housing Trust Fund. This cannot be an either-or conversation. We need both sources of support. And we're looking forward to being involved with this process and in regards to the fact that these resources will enable these housing counseling agencies to properly address the looming crisis to fulfill the objectives of the MPI. And I want to thank you very much for allowing me to present my testimony today.
Thank you. Mr. Rick Sauer.
Good morning, Chairman Green and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Rick Sauer, and I'm the Executive Director of the Philadelphia Association of Community Development Corporations. PACDC strongly supports the Neighborhood Preservation Initiative to supercharge a critically needed $400 million investment in affordable homes, commercial corridors, and small businesses, and to maximize the impact of new federal resources that will be flowing into our neighborhoods. Philadelphia needs action to stimulate economic activity to recover from the devastating impact of COVID. That action must also be equitable and center recovery strategies on attacking the inequality that has led to people of color in Philadelphia being hardest hit by shutdowns, job losses, and the health crisis. PACDC has 4 requests of City Council and the county administration regarding this initiative. First, ensure that neighborhood preservation initiative investments are in addition to and not in place of previous funding commitments to the city's general fund, including the full $20 million annual commitment to the Housing Trust Fund, funding for the land bank, and to fully renew the PHL, taking care of business cleaning contracts and small business support programs operated by the Department of Commerce. Otherwise, it's just robbing Peter to pay Paul. Second, prioritize the allocation of MPI funding to nonprofit organizations with a long-term commitment to rebuilding communities and addressing the needs of lower-income residents. CDCs in Philadelphia are well positioned to invest these resources quickly and equitably. In the last 28 years, they've had a $5.4 billion economic impact in Philadelphia, undertaking the very activities that MPI will support. And they will do so in ways that build wealth and opportunity for neighborhood residents, particularly people of color that have long been denied access to these critical opportunities. Third, we urge you to dedicate a significant portion of MPI resources to our neighborhood commercial corridors. Small businesses in our corridors are desperate for help to bring back shoppers and provide continued local access to needed goods, services, and jobs in all our neighborhoods. There's also a need to help small businesses acquire their property to increase local ownership and wealth building opportunities in communities of color. And finally, when a bond issue of this magnitude is floated, community input and accountability has to be paramount. We urge the city to ensure meaningful community input around the decision on how to allocate MPI bond resources and to issue an annual report on MPI investments and who benefited and whether equity goals are being reached. PACDC applauds City Council and Mayor Kenny for their support of the Neighborhood Preservation Initiative, and we look forward to working with you to discuss how CDCs will lead the way in putting these resources to work to create an equitable Philadelphia. Thank you.
Thank you all for your testimony. Just have a few quick questions and then I'll open it up for questions from members of the committee. I guess I have a question in reference to the Dodd Act when you made reference to housing counselors now have to be certified. What impact has it had on housing counseling in Philadelphia?
Currently, no impact as of yet because by August 1st, 2021, this will all people that provide housing counseling services will need to have that certification that very date to continue providing those services. So currently, one that doesn't have that certification can still provide those counseling services. But by that date, whoever does not have that certification will have to relieve themselves from providing us the support.
Okay. And then for Mr. Sauer and Mr. Gonzalez, considering both your years of experience with your two respective agencies, are there any lessons learned from the Neighborhood Transformation Initiative that we should be using as we embark on the Neighborhood Preservation Initiative?
I defer to you, Rick, first. Thank you.
And then, Mr. Sowers, you're contemplating that question. I would like to note for the record that
improvements to ensure that we really can see what's going on and act appropriately to ensure we maximize the impact of this investment.
Okay. Thank you all for your testimony. I don't see any additional questions from members from council. Appreciate you being here. If Mr. Inuza could then call the next panel.
We originally had Jennifer Rodriguez to testify. I'm not sure that she's here with us.
Okay.
But I think Rafael Cruz will be testifying on her behalf.
I'm actually here. I did make it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
Good morning.
Good morning to you.
In addition to the president and CEO of the Greater Philadelphia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, we also have Andrew Frischkopf, who is the executive director of LISC Philadelphia, and Stephanie Selden, president and CEO of Rebuilding Together Philadelphia.
Thank you, Mr. Iannuzzi. We'll have those three witnesses testify in that order. If you each can state your name for the record, and then we'll have questions from members of council after all three witnesses finish their testimony. Good morning.
Good morning to all, and thank you for hosting today's hearing. I'm Jennifer Rodriguez, President and CEO of the Greater Philadelphia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. For the past 3 decades, GPHCC has been the leading voice developing, promoting, and advocating for 12,000 Hispanic businesses in Philadelphia, while encouraging the advancement and economic growth of the Hispanic community. In Philadelphia, building an inclusive economy has become the top priority of both the private and public sector. This priority has become ever more critical in light of the disproportionate impact of the pandemic in communities of color and in the Hispanic community in particular. At GPHCC, we firmly believe that entrepreneurship is one of the keys to solving the inequity that hampers the growth and development of poor and underrepresented communities, and should be a priority of city government as it plans the allocation of funding and resources in this budget process. We firmly believe that City Council and Mayor Kenny's administration should approach the budget process and the allocation of Federal Recovery Act dollars and the administration of sources, such as the obligations presented here today, as opportunities to grow Philadelphia's economy by supporting diverse businesses. We encourage City Council to invest in the organizations that make up our local entrepreneurship ecosystem, with the goal of increasing the size and the number of diverse businesses, which ultimately will result in new jobs, taxes, and wealth creation in the communities that need it most. The allocation of funds should be focused. For example, the city should prioritize investments in scaling up businesses in key industries where diverse businesses concentrate, such as childcare and restaurants, for example. In addition, it could invest in supporting startups in high wage and high growth industries where scaled diverse businesses are scarce, such as technology and construction. And it could, for example, also focus investments in geographic zones, such as commercial corridors. The allocations of funds should also be layered because entrepreneurs need multiple interventions to grow. For example, businesses along commercial corridors need much more than storefront improvement grants if they are to grow and become more resilient. Consumer-facing businesses in the Latino community tend to operate with thin profit margins, high competition, high regulatory environment, and with inadequate capital. Consequently, they are more vulnerable and, as such, have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. However, with the appropriate resources and tools, these businesses could become more resilient by purchasing their sites, investing in technology, expanding to new locations, or entering the supply chain through institutional contracts. However, to do this, entrepreneurs need access to affordable, high-quality professional services, such as accountants and attorneys. They also need flexible sources of capital and entrepreneurship education that is tailored and delivers results. In addition, programs and services targeted at diverse businesses should be geographically accessible and culturally competent because we have a very diverse community of entrepreneurs distributed throughout the entire city. Finally, we should not forget that entrepreneurs have many options of where to locate and expand their businesses, and we want them to choose Philadelphia. But the relative high cost and difficulty of doing business, coupled with the alarming increase in gun violence and the deteriorating physical environment due to litter, jeopardize prospects of a robust recovery. Investments in trash collection, in customer service system improvements, and technology within city departments that interface with businesses, and crime reduction are all part of the municipal services infrastructure that form the foundation that will encourage businesses to expand and that will attract new businesses to Philadelphia. At the Hispanic Chamber, we are committed to supporting Latino-owned businesses as they recovered from the impact of the pandemic, positioning them for the successful reintegration to the economy under the new normal. But this requires a shared voice and collective action. So as business leaders, as community leaders, and as residents of the city, we must plan for a safe, equitable, and robust economic recovery. Again, thank you for holding today's hearing about this crucial topic. And we at the Hispanic Chamber stand ready to work with you to build a stronger Philadelphia for all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Andrew Frischkoff. I'm the director of LISC Philadelphia. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on bill number 210203 today. LISC supports authorizing $400 million in neighborhood preservation initiative bond funds, especially for affordable housing, economic development, and equitable neighborhood development. LISC has suffered through COVID-19 and Philadelphia has suffered through COVID-19 and increasing violence, which have taken too many lives and livelihoods. We need significant investment in affordable homes and in commercial corridors for economic recovery, and investment in vibrant community spaces and programs for a safe return to community building. LISC urges City Council to take the following steps. Ensure NPI investments are additive to, not replacements for, previous funding commitments.
I believe Mr. Frischkoff may have been frozen. Let's give him a few more moments. Mr. Frischkoff? Okay, why don't we proceed with Ms. Selden, and then we'll then go back to Mr. Frischkoff if he's able to rejoin us.
Good morning, Chairman Green and members of the Finance Committee. My name is Stephanie Selden, and I am the President and CEO of Rebuilding Together Philadelphia. Rebuilding Together Philadelphia revitalizes communities by transforming vulnerable, owner-occupied houses into safe, healthy, and energy-efficient homes. If you are looking for my paper testimony, you will not find it. I ask you to bear with me as I speak from my heart and maybe a few notes. So oftentimes I come to City Council to talk about what the homeowners at Rebuilding Together Philadelphia lack. And today I want to switch that up and talk about what the homeowners that Rebuilding Together Philadelphia serves have, about their strength and about their fortitude. I want you to know about 3 homeowners in particular that we have served during the pandemic. They are a homeowner who was disabled and was terrified of going up and down his stairs, so he was forced to crawl. There was a homeowner that we served who had no water and crossed the street to his neighbor who gave him 5-gallon jugs of water in order to wash his hands during a pandemic. And sadly, just last week, we heard that one of the homeowners that we had served, 17-year-old daughter, was shot standing in her own living room. This homeowner is now asking us for bulletproof glass. So just think of the strength that these three families have and the fortitude. So I want you to know also about our numbers. Rebuilding Together Philadelphia revitalizes about 120 homes a year. We make repairs from roofs to grab bars, and we average about an $11,000 investment per year. We cannot do this without our partners, ASE, Achievability, New Kensington CDC, the Enterprise Center, and soon we hope Germantown United CDC. We could not do our work without these partners recruiting the homeowners and deciding where in their own neighborhoods they believe homeowners are most in need. I want to thank all the city, Mayor Kinney, City Council for the $500,000 in targeted housing prevention program money that Habitat for Humanity Philadelphia, our partner, and Rebuilding Together Philadelphia receive. It's not cash, it's in-kind services from BSRP contractors through PHDC. With that $250,000, half of the money that RTP, half of the in-kind services that RTP receives, we are able to leverage over $1 million in repairs. So we come to you in support of this initiative, asking that the NPI services are delegated to home preservation, but also to home production for the unhoused and tenant habitability. RTP's vision is a safe and healthy home for everyone. And again, like other people have testified, call on your nonprofits with the experience to enact the vision that this amazing $400 million bond could achieve. So I just want to leave you with one happy story. Last week, Rebuilding Together Philadelphia was in in Dunlap with the great Enterprise Center. And we were working with Miss Geraldine. Miss Geraldine was considering moving until Rebuilding Together Philadelphia and the Enterprise Center repaired her home. Miss Geraldine was out sweeping her streets at 7 a.m. And now she has a home that she can pass on to the next generation and have that wealth and the asset building because of our collaboration and the support of the city. I invite all of you to join us on June 4th when we're in Haddington in Councilman Jones' district, and welcome you all. And thank you again for your support and this opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Ms. Selden. Are there any questions for Ms. Rodriguez or Ms. Selden? If Mr. Frischkopf is able to join us again, we will add him to our next panel. Seeing no questions Councilmember Kiana Sanchez.
Thank you to both of you. Thank you, ladies, first for your partnership and all your hard work. You guys both know I'm fans of the work you do. And so, this is a preservation bond, right? So there's some things that are program related, right, that we really need to get the city administration to align so that when we're making some of these infrastructure investments. So I want to know, in your space, in your work, what is it that you see as the top priority on infrastructure investment? And I know Stephanie talked a little bit around some additional housing, but, Jennifer, what else, right? I mean, I know we do the security camera program. I know we do the facade program. If we had to invest in a small business's infrastructure, as this bond seeks to do, what do you feel are the top priorities from lessons learned from the pandemic?
So if my infrastructure, does it need to be physical in order for it to be considered under this bond, or can it be programmatic as well?
There's going to be some programmatic, but you're borrowing into your future. It's not good practice just to, the idea of the bond is we're going to be able to make some structural investment, and then in our operating, you align that, right? So we're leveraging one with the other. So, what are some of the things that we currently don't do as it relates to preservation and infrastructure that you think we should immediately consider?
Well, I mean, I think the look and feel of our commercial corridors in our neighborhoods needs significant investment. They should be walkable and attractive to residents and to shoppers, right? If you don't have a safe, walkable, and attractive shopping district, you'll choose another walkable, safe, and attractive shopping district to go to. So I think in terms of infrastructure, I think that it's important that the investments be focused. This idea of sprinkling a little bit of money across a wide selection just really doesn't get the impact that you need. The concentration of investment, I think it's critical. I think what we've seen a lot of is you do something here and you do something there, but it's just not enough to really turn the corner of any individual commercial corridor. So I think it's important to prioritize because the resources are limited. Now, the way that I look at it, when you invest in the physical environment, that's the building. But how about the operator behind that building or behind that business? There needs to be some real high quality capacity building for those entrepreneurs. And oftentimes we're telling the commercial corridor managers to be commercial corridor managers and technical assistance providers and finance experts. And I think that's just, in our opinion at the Chamber, that's just really a recipe for disaster. A lot of this really requires very specialized knowledge, right? So access to attorneys that can really help businesses negotiate leases, accounting services so that businesses can get their fundamentals in order. We have seen how intensive, comprehensive education for entrepreneurs really does help them make the right decisions for their business. We at the Chamber have a program called Accelerate Latinx that during the pandemic, 15 entrepreneurs in the Latino community that went through the 7-month program created 20 jobs, retained 66 jobs at a cost of less than $2,000 per jobs created and retained. So we know that when you do the fine-tuned investment that is targeted, if you coupled programmatic investment with a physical investment, I think there's an opportunity to really do a lot of good here.
Thank you. Stephanie, we have basic systems, which we all work with, and then we have the wonderful work that you do with Habitat and rebuilding. If I were to say to you, what is the next level of work that you guys could do that you see some work? And, I heard your story about the woman in the bulletproof windows. What does that kind of work look like? And, what is the investment per family that could be transformative in the work? So leverage what you're currently doing. What's the next level for you?
The next level is just to grow, right? So we have 120. When I started 7.5 years ago, we were at 79, but it's not enough, right? There are 27,000 homes in Philadelphia without active plumbing or without kitchens, according to the city's own action plan. So we have a long way to go. And just as far as the return on investment goes, right? I told the Geraldine story about the wealth for the individual community members and the wealth for the neighborhood that just this one homeowner brought. But what I didn't talk about is keeping these homeowners in the city of Philadelphia and paying taxes. We work out in Haddington and in West Oak Lane, and these homeowners have choices to go 2 blocks out and be in the suburbs. And that is something that Rebuilding Together Philadelphia does not want to see happen. And this infrastructure should definitely focus on that return of investment as well.
Thank you. Thank you both, ladies. Look forward to working with you. I see Andy is back.
Yeah.
Andy, for a moment you were speechless, and we know you're not. I'll give it back to the chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Sanchez. Mr. Frischkopf, welcome back to the hearing. If you can just restate your name for the record and continue your testimony.
Thank you. I apologize for the loss of internet. My name is Andrew Frischkopf. I'm the director of LISC Philadelphia. I'm not sure exactly where I left off, but I will just start with LISC strongly urges City Council to encourage wise and bold investments through NPI, including ensuring NPI investments are additive to, not replacements for, previous funding commitments from the city's general fund, prioritizing the allocation of funds to nonprofit organizations who have long-term commitment to rebuilding communities and addressing the needs of lower-income residents, making strategic use of scarce tax-exempt bond funds for affordable housing and commercial corridors. LISC continues to issue low-interest loans and recoverable grants to help CDCs acquire commercial and mixed-use properties by revolving and leveraging funds from a grant we received in 2008 through the Restore Philadelphia Corridors Fund. We also urge Council to direct funds to a significant portion of serving at-risk affordable rental housing, neighborhood commercial corridors, and vibrant community spaces, and also ensuring meaningful community input around the allocation of NPI bond funds and access of data on how funds are being spent, equity goals are being met in neighborhoods throughout the city. Our affordable housing priorities for NPI include production and preservation of subsidized affordable rental housing, preservation of non-subsidized affordable rental housing, improving housing condition to improve the health of homeowners and tenants. Our economic development priorities include commercial corridor revitalization, capital for CDCs and small businesses to acquire and renovate buildings and storefronts on commercial corridors, financial support for CDCs and small business technical assistance providers who are integral to thriving businesses and neighborhood corridors, and capital for small businesses. For equitable neighborhood priorities, in addition to ensuring resident participation in planning activities for NPI, we encourage support for community-based organizations to involve residents in planning and in creating vibrant community spaces, turning blighted prime hotspots into spaces where community members can come back together as we start to ease from COVID restrictions. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Mr. Frischkopf. Councilman McGinn, recognizing you for a question.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Frischkopf and Jennifer and Stephanie for all your work. I'm actually going to follow up a little bit with what Councilmember Quinones-Sanchez said, which is to press a little bit for even more clarity on some of the investments. So for Mr. Frischkopf, one of the questions that I have is that, you know, we don't have an ability to necessarily control rents. And average rent, I think, even in some of our, some of the neighborhoods that are struggling is close to 1,000, if not higher, a month, which far exceeds, and what I would say is market rate rent, which far exceeds the capacity of individuals, probably by, it could be more than double. When you talk about subsidizing the production of affordable rental housing, how do you recommend keeping those units affordable, and what does affordable mean?
So I think the first piece builds on testimony that I think Rick Sauer had presented earlier, and I think that Councilmember Jones had referenced, which is we have affordable housing that has had federal subsidies and state subsidies, many of which expire over a period of time. And those units then can become market rate. And so I think the first piece, but those are set, just to answer your question about affordability, those rents, when we have those subsidies, are often set at 60%, or in some cases below of area median income. And so I think that low-income housing tax credit rent threshold of 60% of area median income, generally speaking, should be the ceiling of what we're talking about in rental housing. It's not that there shouldn't be housing affordable for incomes above that, but we know the crisis is really below that threshold. And so we need to both refresh those federal subsidies, but also where we need to replace them with city subsidies, I think we need to mirror that affordability as much as possible. And that's specifically for the housing that was developed with public assistance in the first place, such as I think Councilmember Jones referenced. The other piece of it, though, is we have much naturally occurring affordable housing, usually smaller scale, 1 to 4 unit buildings that were not built with subsidy and are not necessarily owned by nonprofits who are mission driven, or necessarily owned by deep-pocketed for-profit owners. That's both the high risk and the potential high reward with funds like NPI. Can we help those owners who aren't mission-oriented to renovate, repair their buildings? In some cases, they actually need the same business technical assistance that Jennifer described, that other businesses may need, but they need it as the business of landlords. But in return for assistance from the public sector, we need to get a commitment from them for long-term, stable, affordable rents. And again, I think, targeting 60% and below. It would be great if we had, significant new Section 8 tenant vouchers that could be coupled with the city funds that could help get those rent thresholds even lower. But even if we can't use the federal funds, I think we need to use NPI and other city resources for those units. Does that help answer the question, Council Member?
I mean, it's an interesting perspective. I think, I do think 60% is probably even high.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
Our rental difficulties are largely in the 0 to 30 range, where we will evict people and this is a big struggle because market rate can't actually meet that need. And the question is whether LISC or others have done a comprehensive analysis of both the number and percent of people who are in 0 to 30, maybe like that for that mid-range, and then above, until we get to about 100 or close to it. And obviously, as market rate shifts, right now, I think one of the conflicts that we've got is that the market for housing is relatively strong. Is that accurate? While economics for individuals, particularly in a city like ours, can, for some people, bottom out, or it has simply not improved over a long period of time. And so what we are in a danger of is that as the market rate rentals in a strong housing market either stay stable or creep up and don't reflect actually the economic circumstances of individuals who may have lost a household income earner, may have lost a job or have significantly lost hours or have been laid off with uncertainty about, return to work, or may have suffered a major medical disaster, which is one of the top reasons why we actually evict people. Like, what I guess I'm trying to understand, are we doing some analysis on that level to understand that? And then second, to understand where the need actually is, as opposed to just kind of throwing out the 0 to 60 or whatever AMI threshold we may by capacity try to choose. It may not be a needs-based capacity. I guess that's the question. I want a needs-based, I'm interested in seeing if there's a needs-based number. And then secondly, I still don't think we have answered the question of how, while we encourage either nonprofits, they're a little bit easier to work with, or existing landlords, which I think are complicated, how we maintain affordability that is not based on market rate, but is based on resident needs.
Yeah, so I think that part is complicated. I don't know that anybody has in the nation has solved it, though. I would say that the income range analysis, the most recent one, was really the one done by the city for the housing action plan. But I think to everybody's point, those numbers now sort of could go out the window because so many people lost income in the last year and a half, that whatever the numbers were of sort of how many people were at 0 to 30%, for instance, I think we could probably, add, those by a factor of 30% at least. But the basic sort of analysis had been done. What hadn't been done and hasn't been, I think, is looking at sort of what are the situations of those people in those lowest income brackets, again, particularly pre-COVID, and what are their opportunities for increased income if they have stable housing, and what are, where are there situations where no matter what else happens, they will basically over the course of, of much time need that same affordable rent, that their incomes will not increase. Because I think we can't look at those two things sort of in a full isolation. The analysis we did do in COVID related was with Drexel School of Public Health and a number of nonprofit housing providers to look at where much of the subsidized housing geographically overlaps with the places that were hardest hit under COVID, both by health and by economics. And the one thing I'll say, just looking at the nonprofits, and I think it's probably true of the smaller landlords in those neighborhoods, none of their housing markets, their housing economies are not strong. They are losing money. The nonprofits are redirecting resources to provide food, behavioral health, and other supports for their residents. And I think that then becomes part of the equation. We can look at the rents, and the rents need to be one factor. But what other supports do we need to have in place for residents who, again, are going to need additional supports or have the opportunity with stable housing to get back on their feet economically and eventually be paying higher rent and reducing the need for that level of subsidies? I don't think anybody's done that last analysis. So I don't think there's a number that anybody could come up with and say, this is what we need over the next 5 years for people to be stably housed and have the supports that they need to just survive and we hope thrive.
Well, to be continued. Jennifer, thank you very much. Jennifer, similarly to Councilmember Quinones-Sanchez's question, I absolutely agree with the idea of a need for very specific kind of service-oriented programs that would allow for maybe a shared like legal services and for a corridor or, shared kind of types of things. But I'm also curious about whether, if there's questions about like basics, like, is the in some areas, like I have no idea whether in areas that you serve or the economic corridors that you have, whether there's an appropriate electrical grid, whether people are on the internet appropriately, whether there's water pipes bursting or anything like that, that would also flooding or other types of problems that we should be paying attention to, which in my mind are also forms of infrastructure for sure. And secondly, one of the things that we have been talking about with commerce was that traditional forms of incentives, which are often maybe like tax credits or things like that. What we were hearing with commerce a little bit was that for a boost to a business, sometimes the upfront grant can be more effective than a back-end tax credit. And I'm curious about your concepts of that. Obviously, in an ideal situation, you would want both. But, do you have any thoughts on either of those different types of infrastructure investments and the role of upfront grants and what they can incentivize?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for the question. So the easy answer on grants and tax incentives, obviously, as of right type of incentives are, or by default, are very preferable. Grants upfront are preferable. The tax incentives are very difficult for businesses to avail themselves of unless they have a very competent accountant, and most of them just go to tax preparers, or a lot of them. So tax preparers are oftentimes not well versed on incentives and programs that are available. Tax preparers oftentimes, what they do is they practice tax avoidance within the law, if you will. That's not really the ideal advice for businesses. Nonetheless, that's where our businesses are going, which is why we are advocating for really helping businesses acquire and contract with quality professional services. But for that, we will need subsidies, right? Because the businesses can't really afford high quality professional services. In terms of infrastructure, for example, what we are seeing is that in South Philadelphia, for example, the business community is very interested in physical improvements to that district. Trash collection, beautification, sidewalks, proper lighting, proper facade improvements is something that the South Philadelphia immigrant merchant community could absolutely benefit from, and they are relatively disconnected from the business ecosystem within that community. So they are really interested in receiving, in getting benefits that way. In North Philadelphia, the CDCs, really have, in many ways, have that under control in the sense that they advocate for the commercial corridors there. I think there's more, the leadership there is much stronger in that sense. They are more networked in. But again, I think what we are seeing is that there's this piecemeal approach to the improvements, and then under one session they get lighting, but they don't get facades, or they don't get sidewalk cleaning. So I think it's in my opinion, is the layered approach that really would make the difference. One other thing I would say, and I don't know if this falls within the preservation parameters, but the commercial districts have not had planning in a long time. So if you were to ask how many neighborhood commercial corridors have a plan for their corridor that really outlines the opportunities and the challenges, and an action plan for investment, you probably will see very few that have that. And I think we need to also, different commercial corridors have different characteristics and opportunities, and not all of them need the same thing, right? So I think really proper planning and having an action that can follow would be useful as well.
It's incredibly helpful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And we will keep it in mind. I mean, this conversation is obviously about NPI, but you're giving indications for broader conversations that we'll have outside of this. And I look forward to continuing those with you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions for this panel, I want to thank all of you for being here to testify. We'll call the next panel Mo Rushdie, Sandra Dungy Glenn, Anthony Flard. Yeah, if you could state your name for the record, and then each person testify and proceed in that order. Good morning.
My name is Mo Rushdie.
Feel free to continue your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Mo Rushdie, and I serve as treasurer of of Philadelphia, as well as the co-chair of its Affordable Housing and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committees. I want to thank Council President Clark and Chairman Green and the rest of the committee for allowing me to provide testimony today in support of Council President Bill 210203. The BIA is a trade association of mostly residential developers working throughout Philadelphia, along with the professionals who provide them with products and services. Most of our developer members build townhome developments that can range from single infills to 100-unit plus developments. Some renovate a few modest row homes a year, a few build glass towers filled with luxury apartments and condos, while still others are building low-income housing in neighborhoods where no one else is. There's an urgent need in Philadelphia for affordable housing options for a great many people, and the BIA believes it is time to collaborate and craft policies that help all residents in this city share its prosperity. The BIA has been working closely with City Council and the administration to come up with a comprehensive plan for the private industry to be one of the drivers of building affordable homes. The BIA's affordable housing blueprint would possibly provide 7,000 to 11,000 homes by 2030. The BIA made the hard decision to support and endorse a construction tax as it's a more equitable alternative to other proposals to solving a problem that is the result of a host of issues. And we believe that the entire development community must contribute towards solving this problem. Supporting the development impact tax naturally implies that we support the issuance of the bonds made possible by this tax, with the goal of fast-tracking the production of affordable homes in the city of Philadelphia. The BIA believes that in order for the bond program and the initiatives laid out in Exhibit A of the bill to work, there must be increased capacity to handle applications that can reach over 1,000 homes a year, mostly being built on infill lots. We believe that increased capacity is needed for disposing city land, as well as more capacity to take projects with more than 50% affordable components through the approval process. Furthermore, we believe having an affordable housing czar, which would oversee the processes, capacity issues, and streamlining of applications would be a good idea to hold everyone accountable for the sake of reaching the goal that these bonds are set to accomplish. Between City Council, the Housing Trust Fund, the Land Bank, the Redevelopment Authority, and PHDC, there are still too many different cooks in the kitchen when the demand is urgent and timing is of the essence. Finally, I want to share, as co-chair of the BIA's Affordable Housing Committee, that we have spent the last 6 months sharing with council members our blueprint for attainable housing, which is attached to my testimony today. Our blueprint is a community reinvestment plan that brings to bear our expertise to build housing for residents in the neighborhoods where they live now, because there is a massive need, and we believe we can solve that need more efficiently than anyone else. We have developed financial models for city government as well as our membership to better demonstrate what it takes to bridge the gap needed to provide these affordable homes. The BIA is sincere in its desire to be part of the solution. We believe in solutions that work for all. The BIA supports Council President Clark's bill number 210203, and we ask that the rest of Council support the legislation as well. Thank you for your consideration.
Okay, I'm going to give ladies before gentlemen, the lovely Sandra Dungy-Glenn.
Thank you, Anthony. Good morning, Chairman Green and members of City Council. My name is Sandra Dungy-Glenn, and I am joined by my partner, Taib Smith, and we are speaking on behalf of the collective. And I do want to note that Anthony Fillard, who you'll be hearing from, is also a member of the collective. I thank you for the opportunity to present testimony today on the Neighborhood Preservation Initiative and its potential to catalyze equitable development in Philadelphia. Philadelphia has the highest number of people in the lowest echelon of poverty in America. Philadelphia's Black residents and communities have been victims of public policies that, as reported by the National Trust, have left Black neighborhoods with higher rates of demolition, undervalued housing, underfunded services, and reduced access to financing, all major contributors to the racial wealth gap. For Philadelphia to thrive and modernize, it must invest in Black Philadelphia and dismantle the systems of racism that plague it. I'm speaking today as convener and partner of the collective. The collective is an experienced group of real estate developers, investment professionals, and public policy experts. We are raising capital to create and grow real estate assets that produce attractive investment returns while increasing Black home ownership and wealth. The collective believes real estate is a portal to change, particularly in the areas of health, climate, and economic development. We have learned that 4 pillars explain the relationship between housing and health: cost, conditions, consistency, and context. We explain more about each in our written statement. Investing in real estate should be part of a broader strategy to create a healthy city and healthier built environments that are inclusive, equitable, and sustainable. The collective aims to break the cycle of systemic racism and inequitable access to capital by employing a holistic approach to community development and advancing social impact investing in Philadelphia's real estate sector. Philadelphia's real estate market today is highly investable. Home values are expected to increase further this year, with Black neighborhoods seeing much of that gain. However, this influx of capital and development has not equally benefited Black neighborhoods. Black families are at a greater risk of displacement due to a lack of affordable housing, and local businesses face the constant risk of closure, which has been exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic. Struggling communities are being left behind while outside investors enjoy the rewards of tax preferences such as opportunity zones. The collective met with several members of City Council on March 24th and shared recommendations that we believe will accelerate holistic community development led by experienced Black developers and help close racial equity gaps. We will share 4 recommendations that we ask be added to your priorities. Number 1, enhance and expand the $25 million accelerated fund to provide credit enhancement and cover pre-development costs for developers whose projects have a quantifiable social impact. We recommend broadening the criteria for qualifying projects, raising the guarantee limit, and increasing the investment amount. The accelerator should prioritize projects that provide quantifiable impacts in the areas of employment, business and home ownership growth for Black residents and other people of color, livable income, and access to other essential services. Second, the Neighborhood Preservation Initiative should use an expanded definition of affordable housing to capture the need to provide high-quality housing options to working-class residents. Moderate-income residents who provide essential services such as healthcare, daycare, transit, and hospitality are also in great need of affordable housing options. Therefore, NPI should incentivize mixed income development. Third, we recommend enacting a blight elimination tax. This tax would be levied on absentee landlords who hold vacant lots and abandoned buildings in marginalized and middle neighborhoods and show no intention to develop or sell them. The proceeds from the tax could be used to fund NPI programs. Finally, the collective would like to partner with City Council to implement research-based impact metrics. The collective network is developing social impact metrics to determine how real estate development affects the quality of life in the neighborhoods where it is occurring. We welcome the opportunity to partner as an independent third party with City Council to apply these metrics to NPI investments. Our science-based metrics and diligence process will help ensure that Philadelphia meets its impact targets according to appropriate benchmarks. In closing, our recommendations are based on research and our members' experience working in Philadelphia real estate. We would be delighted to work with you to maximize the impact of capital in Philadelphia neighborhoods. We're happy to discuss this roadmap further and how best to put it in action. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Smith and Mr. Fullard, feel free to state your name for the record and then proceed with your testimony.
Okay, great. Taib, do you want to go first so that you are following up with the collective, or do you want me to go?
No, I'd just like to say that I'm here. I agree and I support everything Sandra said, and I'm in support of you, Mr. Fullard. I'm only here for questions.
Okay, great. Okay. So, again, as you, Mr. Chair, do you want me to proceed?
Yes, sir. Just state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Okay. Anthony Fullard I am the president of West Powelton Development, but also a member of the collective that represents a number of Black African-American developers in the surrounding parts of Philadelphia. And I'd like to say hello to our city council members that may be on this Zoom. I was asked to just to bring some remarks to the bill 210203. First, I am in 100% support of the bill. Reason being because I was actively involved in the NTI bill when that was also floated for the city of Philadelphia when they were going through the demolition of 14,000 parcels of property and also land. And so that was a very successful project that we were able to do specifically with African American demolition contractors that we were able to bring together in various parts of the city of Philadelphia. I believe that we actually was able to successfully train 36 different African American firms that specialize in demolition. They were also non-union firms and also union firms that also belong to the union, and they was able to put together their own firms and be and to do many demolition projects throughout the city. It was a successful program because the city was very supportive of what the initiative was, and that was to build small businesses, to build small African-American demolition firms, but not as subcontractors, but as prime contractors, to be able to do to do work directly with the city of Philadelphia. It made it a very successful program because now one can learn how to do business as a prime, not as a subcontractor, not as one that needed support from a GC that largely are a majority firm. And so we were very satisfied with that. But my questions would be in support of this bond. That bond at that time was $250 million. This bond is stated to be $400 million. I have not seen what were the specifics as it relates to this $400 million bond of what specifics would that actually cover. The $200 million bond that was floated, it was specifically for about 14,000 properties. I don't know if we have that kind of breakdown specifics of how this money is going to be used specifically so that we know, the various areas of the opportunities. Again, the city of Philadelphia represents over 45% of African American people that live here, and so that would be a very great opportunity not only for small businesses but also for workforce as well. So I just would like to see that kind of breakdown. Secondly, as I was listening, I heard that there will be local banks such as PNC involved into the bond proceeds, and I guess that they will be the housing bank or however that's going to break down. But I would like to know, how are we also using proactive banks that have good CRA records of doing business with small African American and also minority businesses as relates to lines of credits that these firms may need as they begin to procure contracts through this bond. That was one of the success that we was able to have with the Emerging Contractors Program, because not only were we able to procure prime contracts, but also we were able to work with 9 different banks and also PIDC to establish lines of credits as these opportunities came online, and then these firms could do the work. They could have the financial resources in order to do their payrolls. They could have financial resources to ensure that they had the monies in order for them to pay for the material and also for the suppliers as well. So it's those types of level of detail that I would be looking for, and that I hope that we can mimic of what we did when we footed the bond back when NTI was being implemented. Then I have a few other points that I want to also make is, what is the timing of this? We hear about floating the bond. We hear about, this $400 million, as a number of individuals has said, that that coming out of this pandemic, small businesses are in need. They are in need of business. They are in need of bringing those opportunities back to their businesses and being able to have the deal flow that they need in order to work. Also, would like to know, what is the plan out of this $400 million bond to help to stimulate long-term business opportunities, not only for the contractors, but also for the commercial quarters that will be, I believe, recipients of the support of this money. But what is the plan for the long term of those businesses, and also that we can help to provide long-term gainful employment for jobs as well, which is surely needed in the city of Philadelphia. And then again, I hope that in this plan and in this initiative, that as what we was able to do when we did the NTI Emerging Contractors Program, we was able to establish a back office operation for these small businesses, for these small contractors, to ensure that as they are able to get these contracts, get these opportunities, but to ensure that they can be successful from start to finish as they do these projects. So so I don't know if we have those types of specifics, but those are the things that we would be looking for, that we would be looking to try to work with the city of Philadelphia to work with this initiative to ensure that African American businesses, minority businesses can also work through this in a seamless and successful way. We can always provide money and provide these initiatives, but if there's no real support behind to ensure that we are successfully seeing our small businesses grow and be and being successful, as they are doing business in the city of Philadelphia, then it's all for naught. And then I'm going to digress also as it relates to African American developers. Again, it is a concern of ours of just having access to the right capital, to the right land, and then to the right process for us to be able to develop in African American neighborhoods that we want to ensure that that our neighborhoods are also focused and also are a part of this renaissance that this bond is put in place to help these neighborhoods to be revitalized. With that said, I have more, but I want to just stop there, and then if there's any questions for us, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, all of you, for your testimony. I can provide some clarity on some of these issues. I know the council president's staff has been working on the program statement, which details some of the information that you, Mr. Fuller, talked about. As part of the Neighborhood Preservation Initiative, from my understanding, it will be similar to the Neighborhood Transformation Initiative under the Street Administration, whereas part of the consolidated plan hearing that we will have in this Finance Committee, there will be a program statement which will provide that type of information regarding how the dollars will be spent. After we take all the testimony for this bill, we're going to ask John Christmas to come on and explain the revised program statement, which has been provided in the chat, and kind of run through that information. There's been a change to the language since that program statement has been circulated to members of council. But I'm going to ask Mr. Christmas, after all the witnesses testify, to go through the program statement, and that will provide some additional information based on the question that you, Mr. Fuller, had raised. And we, like as I said a few moments ago, we will have the program statement as part of the consolidated plan hearing here in the Finance Committee this spring. And that's my understanding of how the Neighborhood Preservation Initiative will move forward. And also, like NTI, that program statement may be amended going into the future as other dollars become available. You also raised some very key points in reference to how we help grow businesses of color, and more specifically African American owned businesses in the city of Philadelphia. I will restate some of my concerns that I stated after the mayor's budget address, based on the fact that this city is going to receive $1.4 billion. Now, of that $1.4 billion, we're going to need at least $450 million to address our deficit that we have for this year. But that still leaves significant amount of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, that to me should be more invested into economic development, especially in our Black and brown communities. If we're going to get out of the issues of poverty, we're going to have to grow wealth, especially in those communities. $700 million of that $1.4 billion will come this spring. The balance of those dollars will come next year, and those dollars have to be spent by the end of 2024. You also referenced PNC Bank. PNC Bank is one of the underwriting banks. The other bank is Siebert Williams Shank, which is an African American owned investment banking firm. It is the #1 public finance firm in the country. They've done a number of investment banking underwriting for the city of Philadelphia. They are what's called the book runner on this initiative, and PNC is the secondary bank, as well as the bond counsel on this matter. We heard from Susan Mays from Cozen O'Connor, as well as Ahmad Zafaris as the other counsel on this offering. And then one other thing I would like at least you, Mr. Fuller, and maybe you, Mr. Rushdie, to talk about the Accelerator Fund. I know separately I've talked to both of you about that fund. If you could provide some more information just for members of council about that fund, that initiative, and how you see the Neighborhood Preservation Initiative could work along with that as a way to do the work that's being proposed.
I'll let Mr. Rushdie go first, and then I'll follow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the Accelerator Fund, as of it stands right now, has raised its first $10 million. We are having some very, very good progress I'm working alongside with Greg Heller into interviewing a lot of banks to have them invest into the fund. We've had some very, very encouraging calls. We've had a call, a very important call last week with JP Morgan Chase, with Alice Rodriguez, the head of the $30 billion fund that will be dispersed to cities to promote diversity, affordable housing in cities that are going to be investing directly into neighborhoods, into CDFIs, and mortgage programs that would target a lot of down payment assistance, closing cost credits, and so on and so forth. So the Accelerator Fund, I mean, the products are pretty much there. We are looking to start dispersing, accepting applications the third quarter of this year. It is going to be based on a scoring system. We have a third-party underwriter for policies and procedures to make sure that we are not violating any kind of fair housing lending procedures. We are going to have a scoring system that will score applications based on where these applications are going to be using the funds to build at, neighborhoods that have higher poverty rates. Black and brown businesses will get higher scores. Black and brown partnerships with existing developers will get some plus points. So again, we think the program is going to be a very successful one. As an executive officer of the BIA, we do know of the issues of accessibility for capital for Black and brown developers. We have also a kind of a just starting partnership with the Enterprise Center to promote and expose a lot of the Black and brown developers that we as BIA, wearing the BIA hat, are not exposed to. And we do think that there is a lot of opportunity that Accelerator Fund is going to be providing for people who live in these neighborhoods, who need funds to perform pre-construction activities such as engineering, architecture, testing, all kinds of stuff that these land bank applications or these city applications for land require for you to provide an application. It would be these funds would be the seed money needed by a lot of minority developers to be able to kind of take that step into the development world.
Yeah, so I'm glad that I asked Mr. Rusty to go first, because he definitely has more information than I do as it relates to the Accelerated Fund. But I'm not on the board of the Accelerated Fund. I'm a potential developer that will be a recipient. If I can get through their underwriting to ensure that that I can be able to have access to those dollars for the development that I'm doing throughout the city of Philadelphia. But however, I must say that the mission of the Accelerated Fund is definitely sorely needed especially for Black and brown, African American, specifically developers that have a track record, that is looking to grow their businesses, and then to be a part of the development community to redevelop the city. Now, the Accelerated Fund is definitely sorely needed because of the type of banking and secondary banking climates that is out here. Okay, and so from what their Accelerated Fund and what they're going to bring to the table for Black and brown developers specifically, as Mr. Rusty said, as far as the pre-development construction cost, is definitely something that is sorely needed. That is easy to bring your development project online. So, and where I know Greg Heller, and I worked very closely with Greg Heller on a major development that I was able to successfully do out in Osage and Pine. And so I know his commitment and where I know his knowledge base of what is needed as well in this area. But again, as I will state over, is that the issue is what the secondary markets, these that are out there that are loaning money to Black and brown businesses, Black and brown developers, that is not conducive for their project. It is not conducive for them to develop their projects in a successful way. So the accelerated fund is definitely sorely needed. Definitely to Sandra's point is that hopefully that these funds can also help to shore up more money, more loan capacity for the accelerated fund, because that mission is definitely needed in order to help to guide the success for African American and Black and brown developers in the city of Philadelphia.
I want to just add one point too, is that we are talking to banks not only on the pre-development kind of loans to be done to the accelerator fund, but we're also talking to the banks on the senior debt portion, which is basically the construction loan. The majority of the development costs, like you were saying, going to be coming from senior debt, and we see that low interest or interest only senior debt. That's a mission that we have been trying to do, and Chairman Green has been introducing us to a lot of banks so that we can pitch the senior debt for Philadelphia into making sure that trying to not only look at it from the pre-development side. This is a complete circle. This is a full circle issue. This is a diversity, equity, inclusion issue. This is access to capital issue. This is a senior debt issue and interest rates, and making sure that the affordable projects work financially, not just on legislation or in paper. And so we came up with these very sophisticated models that divides the city into 3 different regions. We came up with models that basically allows the city to see what these very transparent with the finances of how these projects work and whether they are financeable with senior debt or not. So, this is a very important point, and I stress that, and a few of the council members on this call have heard me talk about this. This is really about making these projects work. Like you said, Mr. Fuller, it's about having the financial products that make the outcome, whether it's to an investor, whether to a lender, that it can be financeable. There are parameters that we should all be educated at to make sure that these jobs are producing the cash on cash, are producing the debt service coverage that these banks require. Because without these, we are not going to be able to produce scalable, affordable housing solutions for the city of Philadelphia.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rushdie and Mr. Fuller. And before I call on Councilmember Sanchez, you raised a question and a point that I want to ask Mr. Smith and Ms. Dungy Glenn regarding the collective. I know recently there was an announcement about 20 banks are going to provide about $100 million in resources for minority-owned firms. And I'm curious from the perspective of both of you from the collective, and I know you're raising money through your initiative, what has been the response from either the banks that have identified this money, or just from your experiences in trying to raise money that can help further some of the work that's being discussed through the Neighborhood Preservation Initiative?
Sandra, would you like to go first?
Nope.
I think you're on mute.
Oops.
Are you there?
I'm sorry, my button keeps going. Why don't you proceed, and then I will follow.
Okay. So, Councilmember Green, thank you for that. I could say so much about the banks, wealth managers, family offices who, frankly, didn't even want to take a meeting with me 2 years ago, maybe took interest in us individually. But once Sandra, myself, and Stephen Saunders started accumulating the intellectual capital of the collective, I have never received such positive response from asset allocators in my life. And to be frank, we were fortunate that we started convening probably about 16 months ago and came to an understanding maybe 9 months ago. But that was during COVID. And we know that African-American communities, African-American women in particular, have been most affected by the intergenerational structural racism through public policy that would make us not have an exoskeleton to protect us from a pandemic, right? And then, to be frank, some of our bureaucratic institutions and players who I would need the help of a council person to get me to meet with, now name drop me and Miss Sandra when they're talking about initiatives, because I think, to Jennifer's point earlier, there is no holistic plan for communities. There are many plans for parasitic capital, but there are very few holistic plans for Black people in particular, or marginalized communities, or 67% of the city's population, which is people of color. And I would also say, if we think about the real estate industry, from real estate brokers to commercial developers, to the finance industry, to arguably, until the last 2 years, most of the people that we talked to at banks who identify as African American were on the CRA side of the bank, or they were on the PR, public relations, communications. But there were very few African Americans and women on the investment side of capital allocation at banks. So dare I say, we are in a reconstruction era, and we should be thinking about a new deal for people of African descent in particular, because why we have a 10x differential between Black household wealth and white household wealth is public policy in an era of white flight that created an infrastructure that allows people to service poverty in Philadelphia. So we have a milieu that maneuvers for the money depending on how it is coming from the Fed or the state. But we do not have an infrastructure that takes the shackles of public policy off of Black people through the lens of entrepreneurship and having control of your own fiscal destiny.
So with that said, Councilman, I would just add that I think the value of the collective, one, has been the timing. There is now increased attention to the need to invest in Black communities and other communities of color through the hands, quite honestly, of Black leadership and business people. And I think that is the value of the collective as we've come together. These are African American developers who have been working in these communities, know them well, know what works and what's needed. And I think the important piece connected to NPI is that the developments of real estate that they are undertaking is very closely connected and joined at the hip, as you might say, with what we call social impact development. So it deals with issues around food insecurity. It deals with affordable housing. It deals with access to health care. And so in their ability to grow their projects and the number of projects they can undertake, that is, I think, a critical part of the success of an MPI type initiative, because these are the developers, I think, who already have the experience and are well positioned to carry out many of the goals that you've set forth. And national capital that is looking through this social impact lens is seeing the collective as a good vehicle to get their investments moving into Philadelphia in a way that it can impact through a portfolio. Our developers have a portfolio combined of about $300 million in projects. And so that does talk about capacity and obviously leveraging impact. So I think that's the value we've been able to bring at this particular point in time. And I think what some of the attractiveness is to capital beyond Philadelphia region, quite honestly. We're hoping that some of our local banks will also be a part of it, but we are very, very intentional about making this a national effort to bring that kind of attention and capital to Philadelphia.
Councilman Green, I would also add that growing up in the city of Philadelphia and frankly, growing up in close proximity to poverty, you never learn that capital is a product. So when I first started getting larger deals, and I would show an asset allocator a $5 million or $10 million deal, they would say, "Oh, it has impact. It's close to mass transit." And they would get back on the train to New York, and I wouldn't hear from them. And somebody pulled my card and told me that that person eats off of the fees. So the same amount of paperwork or the same amount of effort it would take him to make a certain amount of money off a $50 million deal or a $100 million deal was worth his time. And although my deal was attractive, it was too small. So if you think about what Ms. Sandra just mentioned, in the collective, we have approximately $300,000 of shovel-ready deals. We are not looking...
300 million.
I'm sorry, 300 million. Excuse me, I'm talking too fast. We are not looking at this from a space of building capacity or being the MBEs with other, frankly, white-led institutional partners. We are practitioners with, decades of experience collectively who have shovel-ready deals and have cultural competence of what's in the best interest of the communities that we're from. And that is a part of the ethos of the collective.
Okay. Thank you all for your testimony, Councilmember Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank Mo from the BIA and the members of La Collective, the collective. I think, when we're normally talking about these kinds of neighborhood investments, we appreciate all of the work of our CDCs that are nonprofit partners. But the fact that the private sector is saying we need to be part of the solution and getting to a more equitable recovery, I think is an important intersection. And it is a point where we now have to be, as Sandra said, more intentional about how we're going to invest these money in neighborhoods, how we're going to leverage who has the social impact for short-term and long-term. And so I appreciate the fact that they see themselves as part of the solution as we move forward and we really scale up. I mean, I think there's an urgency of now, and, I want to echo your sentiments, Mr. Chair, that, the budget in its current form and its presentation is not bold enough, right? But how we leverage this and then realign some of the proposals that are being put forth by the mayor, I think are going to be huge. When I look at gentrifying communities like South Kensington, the market's going to do what the market's going to do. I have to do what I need to do to ensure that people choose to stay here who want to, and that we can build in a more equitable way using and leveraging our public resources and infrastructure investments. So I just want to thank them because I think the conversation has changed. There are more people at the table, and we want to, honor the work that our CDCs have done in going into markets where no one wanted to go, and our Black developers who've gone into markets where other people haven't wanted to go, and then sort of like, what's the intersection so that we can have a more equitable recovery and growth. So I just appreciate that, and really wanted to highlight that moment that the conversation is very, very different, and that there is an urgency of now. There's capacity and experience, and what we do in government will matter. So thank you, folks. Look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you, Councilmember Sanchez. Councilmember Ginn.
Yes, thank you very much. I also just want to thank this panel, and especially Mr. Smith and Sandra Dungy Glenn, whom I've known for a really long time, and just reemphasize, I'm interested in self-determination and the ability for communities to be able to, as I think Mr. Smith, you said, control their, not only just their financial destiny, but the destiny overall. And I am interested in this issue that you pulled up that I think we drew out with Jennifer Rodriguez is the issue of planning and making sure that there are more voices at the table and a purposeful planning initiative that goes beyond maybe what the existing capacity, say, of a corridor. It's, I want to make sure that this is truly part of the growth destiny, of neighborhoods and communities, and is maybe, just making sure that it's as robust as it can be. And I hope that through the budget session and in part through some of this work, we can continue to stay in touch about how to do that in a much more significant manner.
I welcome any opportunity, particularly to convene interdisciplinary practitioners. And I would say, frankly, there are a lot of research institutions that lobby on behalf of big business or academia, but I know of very few that lobby on behalf of the median, let's say, citizen. And then the median citizen in Philadelphia is living in or proximity to poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And Councilmember Gibb, I just wanted to offer that, and following up with Taib, that one of the things through the collective that we're working hard to do, as we mentioned, is development of the social metrics. And we would be very happy to work with City Council about what that could look like, and the whole idea of creating what we're calling health, wealth, and wellness master plans that are part of what our developers are working in communities through and with, so that it's not just project by project, but really has a broader lens in terms of what the needs are and how through real estate and these development projects you can help to fill those gaps. So as we learn and continue to in that work, we'd love to share it with you, and hopefully it may be of some benefit.
Yes, absolutely. I think we need, per Councilmember Quinones Sanchez's comment, we need new ideas at this point. I think we need new energy. And of course, I think the possibilities are determined by who gets to talk about them. So one of the exciting things sometimes about being outside of government is that you get way more people with a bigger sense of what the possibilities are, because, it's not surprising that we get overly constrained when we're inside of government. But I really look forward to that. And I think that this budget process will be an important time for the collectives, the way you're framing your mission and your urgency will be very important, I think, through this budget process and helping us think about something bigger that could get started now. Thank you very much to both of you and to the panel. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank this panel for your testimony this afternoon. Appreciate the input that you provided. I'm going to ask Mr. Iannuzzi to call the next panel. This is the last panel on this bill. After this panel, we will then hear from Mr. Christmas to go over the amendment, and then we will actually move into our public meeting to vote on the bill, and then we'll come out of the public meeting to go back in the public hearing regarding Resolution 210191.
We have Kelly Gastley, Managing Attorney for Philadelphia VIP, Alex Balloon, the Manager of the Tacony Community Development Corporation, Rachel Garland, Managing Attorney at CLS, and Nora Liktash.
If those witnesses want to come on, we'll take them in that order. If you could just please state your name for the record, and then we'll have each witness testify. And then after all the witnesses have testified, we'll then proceed with questions from members of council.
Chairperson Green, I believe I was first.
Feel free to begin.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, or actually good afternoon now, Chairperson Green and council members. I'm Kelly Gastley, the Managing Attorney at Philadelphia VIP, here to testify on Bill number 210203. I'm speaking in favor of the financing of the Neighborhood Preservation Initiative and specifically the housing programs. I'd like to thank City Council and the Division of Housing and Community Development for continued support of VIP's Tangle Title and estate planning work over the years. The support allows VIP and our volunteers to help over 400 clients every year with Tangle Title and estate planning matters. It also supports the Tangle Title Fund, which pays for unavoidable legal and administrative costs that are associated with getting title. Tangle Title, there's growing awareness of this issue across Philadelphia, as so many of you know, but it's still a very large problem that needs our attention. It prevents access to repair grants and loans that we've heard a lot about this morning, and it can prevent folks from making arrangements for back utility bills and for mortgage payments. And if left unresolved, Tangle Title issues inevitably mean that a family can't stay in their home, which is exactly what we all want to prevent. At VIP, we recruit, train, and support volunteer attorneys who represent over 100 new Tangle Title clients every year. These cases take anywhere from a few months to maybe 2 years to resolve. They're pretty complex. Many of our clients who come into us have already tried to resolve the issues on their own, and they just cannot. Housing counselors provide excellent support on related issues like real estate taxes and mortgage foreclosures, as we also heard about this morning. But resolving Tangle Title issues really does require legal knowledge and experience that we need to rely on attorneys for. For many Tangle Title cases, having an attorney is really, unfortunately, a necessity, even for seemingly simple title issues like the client Ms. Caldwell, who I described in my written testimony. So it's something that we really need to make sure we keep investing so that those legal services are there to help folks get through these title issues and secure their home. Tangle Title Fund is a really important piece of the puzzle because it pays for the costs that can't be waived in resolving title issues. At VIP, we have excellent relationships with a lot of city agencies, but even with those great relationships, there are just unavoidable costs that have to be paid for to resolve these title issues. And we're really grateful for the continued support of the Tangle Title Fund to make sure that that money is there. The average Tangle Title client needs about $1,700 from the Tangle Title Fund to resolve their title issue. We're really happy to be able to keep that number low through a lot of the arrangements we have, for instance, with the Department of Records, which allows us to save a lot of money to not draw down the Tangle Title Fund for things like deed recording fees. So at VIP, we've used the Tangle Title Fund and we've used our volunteers over the years to tackle these Tangle Title cases. And we're continuing to recruit new volunteers into our effort. But we're also turning to estate planning to try to prevent a lot of these Tangle Title issues from coming up. We're raising awareness through outreach with community partners, which is something we've been able to do a lot more of in the last 2 years, thanks to support from DHCD. And we're recruiting volunteers to help those clients who are coming into us, who weren't coming into us before, and to help those clients with their estate planning. We all know that creating a will is so much simpler. It requires a lot less of an attorney's time than resolving a Tangle Title issue. And so it's something that VIP has been putting a lot of time into to try to prevent these Tangle Titles before they begin. So it's really a complement to our longstanding Tangle Title work. And I'm now happy that we have volunteers helping over 100 clients a year with wills as well as with Tangle Title issues. And we're committed to continuing this outreach and these services to make sure that at the same time we're resolving these Tangle Title issues, we're also preventing more of them from arising. So with further investment from the city through this Neighborhood Preservation Initiative, we can make more meaningful dents in this systemic problem. We can keep people in their homes and we can strengthen our blocks and our communities. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you. And we'll have the next witness testify. That believe that will be Mr. Balloon, then Rachel Garland, then Nora Leshkash.
Good afternoon, Councilmember Green. Thank you for allowing me to speak at this hearing. My name is Alex Balloon, and I'm the Executive Director and Corridor Manager of the Tacony Community Development based in the Tacony neighborhood of Northeast Philadelphia. We are a volunteer-driven Main Street organization focusing on our commercial corridor, and I'll summarize my remarks. In 2020, Philadelphia's commercial corridors were hit especially hard by civil unrest, COVID shutdowns, and a significant economic recession due to COVID-19. In Tacony, a number of stores were damaged, and we lost a significant number of neighborhood businesses. Many of the business owners we work with are women, new Americans, and entrepreneurs of color. We support the Neighborhood Preservation Initiative because it invests in Philadelphia's neighborhood commercial corridors in outlying commercial districts. While affordable housing is an expansive and critical need, we urge the City Council to designate a significant portion of these funds for proven programs in neighborhood economic development. We know these investments lead to significant returns in terms of job creation, investment, and neighborhood revitalization with spillover benefits. The Commerce Department has some smaller neighborhood economic development grant programs that are proven to work and have quick turnaround times. These include programs for storefront improvements, camera grants, corridor cleaning. We've put them all at work in Tacony, and we've seen direct and tangible benefits to improve our CDBG eligible neighborhood. We've renovated 38 storefronts. We've seen a decline in effective vacancy rate in vacant buildings from 30% to 3%, and a 100% increase in median home sale price over the last 5 years, leading to an unprecedented investment in housing rehabilitation. This has created quality new workforce housing at no direct cost to the taxpayer and welcomed many new home buyers of color to our neighborhood. I did want to respond to some previous remarks. When we talk about types of investments for commercial corridor and what works, fixing them up gets more people fixing up, and it's really critical to be intentional about this work, to borrow a phrase from Councilmember Quinones Sanchez. Addressing deferred maintenance, city-owned blighted buildings, expanding the use of Act 135, improving lighting for safety, removing dead trees, addressing city department backlogs. These are valuable investments to both managed and not actively managed corridors that make a real difference on our city's commercial arteries. Thank you again, Councilmember Green and members of this committee, for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Ms. Garland?
Oh, hello. My name is Stephen Bolero from the Legal Clinic for the Disabled, and I'll be taking Ms. Garland's place. Testimony. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Bolero, and I'm an attorney with the Legal Clinic for the Disabled here in Philadelphia. I am here to ask you to maintain funding for programs that keep people in their homes. Specifically, I am here to urge you to fund eviction prevention funding for legal services at $3 million this coming fiscal year. This will restore the cuts made to the successful Philadelphia Eviction Prevention Project in the budget, and will take steps towards funding implementation of right to counsel for tenants in eviction hearings. City Council unanimously passed right to counsel in 2019, and now is the time to start funding it. Systemized racial inequality has led to Black communities being hit hardest by the pandemic, with higher rates of infection coupled with less access to quality health care. These same communities are the ones most at risk for imminent eviction or mortgage foreclosures when the courts resume effectuating evictions. While we have access to unprecedented rental assistance, this money alone doesn't help many renters with disabilities. Many of our clients are shut out from increased unemployment benefits and rental assistance due to their fixed incomes. They face unique challenges that only a lawyer could help them navigate. I've worked with clients that don't understand their eviction lawsuit due to cognitive disabilities. I've worked with clients who need accommodations in their homes so that they can live there safely. And I've worked with clients who just need time to move into a safe and suitable home before a lockout. Landlord-tenant court reopened this past September, and tenants facing court eviction hearings and illegal evictions need legal services to prevent eviction, connect with resources, improve habitability of their homes, and stabilize their housing. Legal services is also essential to training and supporting the city's housing counselors who are now working with tenants to access rental assistance. The Philadelphia Eviction Prevention Project, or PEP, was created by City Council because you recognize that not only does poverty cause eviction, but evictions cause a prolonged poverty. PEP has made a lot of progress over the past 3 years in resolving evictions, and Philly was in a better position to deal with the pandemic because of the support PEP provides to renters. Unfortunately, the budget is cutting PEP in half, gutting representation of and support for renters facing eviction. For what amounts to a drop in the budgetary bucket, PEP has been incredibly successful. 95% of renters helped by PEP have successful outcomes. They are more likely to win their cases, avoid default judgments, and enter into agreements that avoid disruptive displacement. Now is the time to be investing in safe, stable, and affordable housing for renters. Preventing eviction saves lives and stabilizes our communities. Thank you for allowing me to testify today.
Thank you for your testimony.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. My name's Nora Lichtash, and I'm on the steering committee of the Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Communities, which is a group of 70 faith, labor, disability rights, community, and agriculture organizations that represent more than 80,000 city residents. We joined together to support the creation of new resources and policies that address the city's housing and food affordability crisis. And I'm here today in support of the Neighborhood Planning and Preservation Initiative because of what's happened a while back and what's happening today. In 1987, the organization I worked for, the Women's Community Revitalization Project, was started because the greatest need in our community was for rental homes that families could afford. Today, 34 years later, data shows that 1 out of every 4 families in our city lives below the poverty level, and that almost all of them, 94% of those families, are housing cost burdened. Once they pay for their housing, they don't have enough left over for other basic needs. I'm here today in support of Bill 210203, but once bond funds are authorized, our coalition is advocating for these resources to be focused on Philadelphians that are hurt the most by the affordable housing crisis: people of color, people with disabilities, women, and children. In every council district, at least 44% of renters and 26% of homeowners are paying too much for their housing. In some districts, those numbers go up to 59% of renters and 35% of homeowners, and these statistics are from before the pandemic. Our coalition hopes to work with council as decisions are made about the allocation of Neighborhood Preservation Initiative funds. As a city, we've been losing ground. There's real mismatch between what most residents can afford to pay for housing and what's available. We've come to believe that Mayor Kenny is not taking this growing affordability gap seriously, and that's why he's proposing to cut funding to the Housing Trust Fund in the coming year's budget. It's clear to us that we need both the bond funds and the money that was committed from the general fund to ensure that we can make a difference and more Philadelphians have the funds they can afford. I was limiting this to 2 minutes, but we really care about sustained affordability, community control, and have a lot of interest in understanding if money is going to private developers to help subsidize housing, how are we thinking about ensuring long-term affordability and the support for tenants who will be renting the private developers' units.
Thank you for your testimony. I would like to recognize Councilman McGinn for comments.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank this panel, in particular, Legal Services for the Disabled, and Nora. I want you to know that our City Council absolutely hears you on this issue, and we're really proud that Council has been leading the charge on housing, and we will continue to do so. I also just want to thank the testifier. I'm sorry, I forgot your name, for Legal Services for Legal Clinic for the Disabled.
Stephen Valero.
Hi, Steve. Thank you very much. That's okay. No, thank you very much. But one of the things that I think you are pointing out, and this is both, well, let me say this first. One, the eviction work and the eviction prevention work has been historic. For one thing, we are the first and only city that I know of that is basically cut down to 1/4 of its previous evictions, from 20,000 evictions in 2019 and consistently 20,000 evictions, probably a year since I came in 2016, to about to under 5,000 in 2020. And that has been a combination of rent assist, legal services, partnerships with the courts around diversion and other types of things. But there's no question that your emphasis on the role of legal counsel is critically important. And I think we want, I just want to express that our job is to stay the course and to seek to end poverty-based evictions in Philadelphia. With the amount of money that we have in Rent Assist, with the kind of partnership that we have now, we can stand together and say at this point, as we are facing an economic recovery, that we should be ending poverty-based evictions in Philadelphia. And if we can do it in the highest poverty city in the country, then anybody can do it with the right amount of focused work. That being said, I also want to emphasize that, I want to thank Council President Clark. I want to thank Council Chair, the committee chair rather, Councilmember Green, for their leadership in ensuring that legal services will be covered. So to Steve and to CLS and to other legal service entities, we want you to know that this will be one of the areas that could potentially be covered through NPI. But the more important issue for us, I think, is to, as Nora said, to make this a priority of this administration. It really does need to be something that needs to be funded. And as the city budget expands, and if we're going to talk about tax breaks, we must be able to say that this money and supports for renters in crisis and for affordable housing is both an investment through NPI for the long term, and as well a year-to-year commitment from this administration through our regular budgeting process. Both can exist, but the importance for us is to make sure that affordable housing, as Nora said, for folks who are literally at risk for imminent eviction, for long-term instability, or for homelessness, have to be prioritized as we begin, as we continue to expand this work. But I want to thank both of you for your testimony and for your tremendous commitment. We've made incredible strides. We are seeking to stay the course. And I think your partnership has been really critical to that being even possible, because I don't think it would have, a year ago from where we were here a year ago, the worst was on the horizon. Today, Philadelphia is actually a leader, and that's pretty amazing. And that is all due to credit that all of you have done on the ground day to day. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Sanchez.
Yeah, I also want to echo what Councilmember Gim has said. When it comes to investing and helping people stay in the most affordable house they have, which is the one they have, the work of Tangle Title, of helping people navigate that, it's just an incredibly invaluable. And so I also want to thank all of you for, keeping us focused and looking at how do we do systemic change, right? So that part of this legal counsel is really addressing, and I know that Councilmember Gim and all of you in the task force, along with the private sector, really have been changing how the courts view this, how they process this, how we treat folks, and just want to continue to put on your radar, the need to continue to push for the language access component of this so that all communities really have access to this. And I know you guys do. I just want to, put it out there just because, as it relates to the courts and sometimes on some of the other systems, we want to make sure that people always have that access. So we appreciate your partnership. We appreciate what you've done. And, I want to echo this sentiment. This work is the best homeless prevention we could do. And that this kind of funding needs to be structurally put in the budget as a line item that just doesn't get touched, that every single year we're not here fighting about it. Because I think this last year we've been able to prove through COVID, not only the necessity, but the effectiveness of what we can do when it's all hands on deck. So thank you for the work. And I look forward in this budget discussion, as we've done every year, It gets really frustrating, Mr. Chair, that we're always fighting for stuff we say it's important. And, we will continue to do that as our role in council, but the administration has to really understand and prioritize this work in this space because of the effectiveness and the collaboration that we've seen that's been very unique. So thank all of you. We look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Council members Gim and Sanchez, for your comments. I want to thank this panel for your testimony, all of you, and for the great work that your organizations have done, from VIP and CLS. And Ms. Licktash, I think we are scheduled or planning to have a follow-up conversation regarding some of the issues you addressed and how we can address that in this year's budget process and going forward. So look forward to that conversation regarding the Housing Trust Fund and trying to address these issues so we're not in this constant challenge, as Councilmember Sanchez just stated, of trying to fund the work that you're doing and the work that others are doing to provide affordable housing in the city of Philadelphia. With that, I believe that is the last panel of witnesses for this bill. There was an amendment that was circulated in the chat feature. This is an adjustment to the amendment that was circulated to all the members of council. I see Mr. Iannuzzi is now on the screen. Are you going to walk us through the amendment, or is Mr. Christmas?
Mr. Christmas is available to do that, Mr. Chair.
Yes. And am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the amendment that was circulated yesterday has had essentially Exhibit A and Exhibit B. At the request of a couple of council members, we've modified the Exhibit A, which is the program statement. All other aspects of the amendment are exactly as what was circulated yesterday. So that, and as I had said in the email, and I sent an email to all of the council members in there, the committee members rather. The Exhibit A has been changed to allow for legal services costs to be for tenants to be covered, and also to allow trees to be addressed with respect to neighborhood infrastructure related projects. Also, the Exhibit A had an addendum which related to economic opportunity plans, or a template for economic opportunity plans that will be part of individual projects that are undertaken under the Neighborhood Preservation Initiative. So, again, the only thing that has changed is the Exhibit A to the amendment. And so, and I have communicated with the clerk to be aware that both Frank and Mike Decker, that the Exhibit A is being changed. So the one that you got yesterday should be taken out. The one you got today should be added, but you are keeping the addendum, which was just the economic opportunity template. So someone would basically offer the amendment as modified by the new Exhibit A, keeping the old economic opportunity plan template. That could be so moved, it could be offered and moved and adopted by the committee. And I can address other issues if people have it.
Mr. Christmas, thank you for that explanation of that part of the amendment. If you could just give a brief overview of the items in the program statement. There were some questions that were raised regarding the program statement and neighborhood preservation initiative and how those dollars will be spent. And I believe the program statement lays out those categories, but just for the record, if you could just kind of give a detail of those areas.
All of the different programs in the program statement?
Right, just kind of the broad categories that are in the program statement.
Oh, sure. So the broad categories would be rental assistance, small landlord loan program, basic system repair program, adaptive modification program, Philly First Home, Tangle Title, eviction diversion, housing production, housing preservation, permanent homelessness housing, direct support to businesses, small businesses, investment in neighborhood commercial corridors, and neighborhood infrastructure programs. Is that?
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Christmas? Seeing none from members of council. Thank you, Mr. Christmas, for joining. So for the witnesses that were testifying on this bill, bill number 210203, you can leave the meeting. I know we do have other witnesses that are here for the resolution. They can stay on Microsoft Teams, and we'll take a few moments for that to occur. And before we continue, I just want to ask, are there any other questions or members of this committee or any other witnesses to testify on this bill?
Mr. Chair, how much long, I know there's an additional resolution, can we have an estimated time for the hearing?
I do not have an estimated time. I will say this, that the other resolution has, give me one moment, on resolution 210191 has Frank Breslin from our Revenue Commissioner, and that'll be followed by another panel of 2 individuals. And then we have, I believe, 2 other individuals that may be available to testify. So I would venture, hopefully we'll be able to finish by, I hate to use estimates and assumptions, but I would hope that we'll be able to finish by 1:30 with the Finance Committee hearing. But the plan is to go into the public meeting now to vote out an amended 210203, and then come back into the public hearing to hear the resolution.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was going to suggest. Thank you so much. So we'll vote and then we'll go back. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No problem. Okay. And because I don't hear any other witnesses or any other comments from members of council on bill number 210203, this concludes the public hearing on this bill. We'll now go into a public meeting to consider action on this bill before this committee. I will ask Mr. Iannuzzi to call the roll and take attendance for members of this committee, and please indicate you are here by saying present.
Councilmember Cindy Bass.
Good afternoon, I am present.
Councilmember Alan Dom.
Good afternoon, I'm present.
Councilmember Helen Gam.
I am present.
Councilmember Bobby Heenan.
Present, Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember Curtis Jones Jr. Councilmember David O. Councilmember Maria Quinones Sanchez.
Present.
Councilmember Mark Squilla.
Good afternoon, I'm present.
And Chair Green.
And I am present. Thank you, Mr. Iannuzzi. At this point, I would like to recognize Councilmember Heenan for a motion on amendment to bill number 210203.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I offer an amendment to bill number 210203. A copy of the amendment has been circulated to all members of the committee, and I move that the amended bill number 210203 be approved.
Second.
Second.
I will note for the record that the amendment to 210203 was seconded by Council Member Gim. It is properly moved and seconded that amendment to bill number 210203 be approved. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion carries. An amendment to bill number 210203 has been approved. At this point, we'll now call on Councilmember Heenan for a motion on bill number 210203 as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that bill number 210203 as amended be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit the first reading of this bill at our next session of council.
Second.
For the record, it has been seconded by Councilmember Maria Kiana Sanchez. It has been moved and properly seconded that bill number 210203 as amended be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? The ayes carry and the motion passes. At this point, we will leave the public meeting and go back into the public hearing regarding resolution 210191. The first panel for this resolution is Frank Breslin, our Revenue Commissioner.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. I didn't actually read the resolution earlier in the hearing, so I should do that.
Yes, correct. Thank you for that. If you can read the resolution for the record, and then we will come back to our Revenue Commissioner to testify.
Resolution number 210191, resolution authorizing the Committee on Finance to hold hearings regarding the potential of land value taxation in and for Philadelphia.
Thank you. And with that, Mr. Breslin, please state your name for the record and then proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon. Excuse me. Good afternoon, Chairperson Green and members of the Committee on Finance. I'm Revenue Commissioner and Chief Collections Officer Frank Breslin. I'm here today to testify on behalf of the administration on Resolution 210191, which authorizes the Committee on Finance to hold hearings on the potential of a land value tax in and for Philadelphia. The administration, like council, is committed to a fair and efficient tax system. And although a land value tax is intriguing, we are unable to support this proposal. The law department believes that the city of Philadelphia does not have the authority to enact a land value tax. Additionally, we do not believe that a land value tax would meet the requirements of the uniformity clause of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Enacting a land value tax will likely spur costly litigation against the city. Furthermore, the law department does not believe the city would prevail in court. If we enacted such a tax and lost in court, it is possible that the entirety of real estate tax revenue for both the general fund and the school district could be in jeopardy for the tax year in question. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on this matter. I am joined by Stephen Wakefield, Deputy Solicitor in the Law Department, and we are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Breslin. Just wanted to go in more detail in reference to your testimony and when you made reference to in jeopardy. Give me some more perspective on that concern.
Yeah, I'll allow Mr. Wakefield to join in on the legal side of this, but just in general, from my perspective, is that if the tax was found to be unconstitutional for a given tax year, that it is possible that the but the courts could rule that the tax, in being unconstitutional, would have to be refunded to the taxpayers. So that would be the jeopardy.
And if Mr. Wakefield is here, he can provide some more detail regarding that concern. But Mr. Breslin, are you aware of other jurisdictions in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that are cities not of the first class, but have a land value tax?
Yes, my understanding is there's approximately 14 jurisdictions that have a land value tax in Pennsylvania, and up to 21 that had it at one time. I think 7 have repealed it, including Pittsburgh. But as you stated, no cities of the first class, and the cities that have it have been granted specific authority from the Commonwealth, and Philadelphia, as a city of the first class, has not been granted that taxing authority.
Well, this is actually a more detailed conversation we can have with Mr. Wakefield, which I think I did just see him on screen. Mr. Breslin, from your understanding, from the cities that have a land value tax, they had to go through a transition process. Correct?
What I'm not sure what type of transition you're referring to.
Transition from before land value tax to adopting a land value tax.
I am not sure of that. I know Pittsburgh had the land value tax for, I guess they did, but they had it for quite some time. I think they've been, there's jurisdictions that have had this for decades and decades. But I'm sure at some point they had to make that transition. And Steve, if you have any insight there or into anything I said, please join in.
Certainly. So the Pittsburgh was allowed.
Mr. Wakefield, before you proceed, if you could state your name for the record for the stenographer, and then proceed with your commentary.
Certainly, I apologize. Stephen Wakefield from the City of Philadelphia Law Department. So Pittsburgh enacted theirs in 1913 in response not actually to a grant of permission, but to a command by the General Assembly as part of the second-class city code. And the second-class city code required Pittsburgh to have 2 separate millage rates, one for land and one for buildings. And so they had then to enact their own, they had to set their own millage rates within the constraints set by the second-class county code. In the 1970s, the third-class county code was amended to allow, but not to require, this sort of bifurcated millage where you have the higher land and lower building tax. A number of third-class cities over the decades between 1975 and now then either chose to enact it or did not enact it, but those that chose to enact it did indeed have to pass some legislation saying that we are going to have this, and then to set the parameters and set the various millage rates.
So to follow up on Mr. Bretlin's commentary, and from your point, and I think from his perspective, he raised a concern that if this was deemed not constitutional, that could cause a challenge for the finances of the city in reference to a refund. And if you could state for the record some of your perspectives on the challenges of Philadelphia implementing a land value tax based on Mr. Breslin's statements.
So the biggest concern that we would face in implementing this tax is not so much the statutory authority, which you can always go to the General Assembly and acquire the statutory authority. The largest hurdle is that the statutory authority that the General Assembly grants still has to comport with the uniformity clause of the Pennsylvania Constitution. And so what the uniformity clause essentially states, for those who don't know, is that all tax on a particular class of objects must be uniform within the Commonwealth. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court, acknowledging that this is apropos of nothing, has decided that there is one class of real property in Pennsylvania, and that is real property. So absolutely all real property in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is part of a single class. And you cannot have any disparate treatment and still comport with the uniformity clause. So So in the recent decision in Valley Forge Towers, which is a 2017 case, it didn't deal with this directly, but there's a lot of discussion of the uniformity clause and what it means for taxing jurisdictions. And something the Supreme Court was very clear about is that any systemic treatment which is disparate and is intentional violates the uniformity clause. And the Supreme Court goes on actually at length to say that it doesn't matter what your reasons are, it doesn't matter how wise your decision may have been, that any sort of systemic disparate treatment itself violates uniformity and itself is unconstitutional. There are other taxes in Pennsylvania which have been rendered completely void but under the uniformity clause. So Pennsylvania has on multiple occasions tried to tax income. And everybody knows right now we do have an income tax. The income tax has almost no exceptions to it, and it's not graduated. And the reason for that is we used to have a graduated income tax in Pennsylvania. Because we had a graduated income tax, the entire tax was ruled invalid by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So we passed another income tax in Pennsylvania that used the taxable income number from the federal government. The Supreme Court said because the federal government's number includes some items of income and excludes other items of income, that is not uniform, and they invalidated the entire tax. And so the risk that we run here is that if it is found to be unconstitutional pursuant to the uniformity clause, that the Supreme Court could invalidate the entire tax. And in invalidating the entire tax could create a requirement that we refund any taxes which have been collected under that invalid tax. And that would probably be the remedy that anyone suing us would seek. Nobody's going to sue us just for a declaration that this is unconstitutional. They're going to sue to get their money back. And so that would be the remedy, is refund.
So to follow up on your point in reference to the concern of potential remedy from litigation, then with the jurisdictions that Mr. Breslin identified that currently have the land value tax, why has that tax in those jurisdictions, although they do have, and we'll get to the statutory authority issue at some point later, there has not been litigation regarding the uniformity clause in those jurisdictions. And so I'm curious why, if they have not been deemed not to be uniform and having a land value tax, that would cause a challenge for the city of Philadelphia when those jurisdictions could be used as evidence that this does not violate the uniformity clause in reference to a proposed land value tax.
Well, it's a non sequitur to say that because these other jurisdictions have not been found to not be uniform, that we would be found to be uniform. The reason they've not been found to not be uniform is that no person has raised this question. No court's had an opportunity to opine.
Right, I hear you, but I wouldn't say it's a non sequitur. I would say that considering that there has not been litigation in those jurisdictions for someone that is a taxpayer in those jurisdictions who can make the argument, even based on the Valley Forge case that you stated, that you charging me a tax based on land separate and apart of real estate, that provides an opportunity for me to get refunded from the tax you're assessing in a city of the third class. That provides an opportunity. But that litigation has not occurred as of yet. So it could be used in the reasoning for why it's not a uniformity clause issue, even though there has not been any litigation as of yet. I mean, I understand the concern that Mr. Breslin raised, but the fact that this litigation has not occurred as of yet also provides some perspective. And I'm sure there's probably reasoning why that has also not occurred.
So I might be able to provide some perspective as to why this hasn't occurred. So I actually did not start in government. I started doing local taxation work and real estate work in the counties as a private side attorney. And actually 4 of the jurisdictions which have this bifurcated millage rate were areas that I worked in when I was in private practice. The reason that no one has sued the city of Washington over this is because the city of Washington collects something like $40 million in real estate tax a year, as opposed to our, say, $1 billion, $1.5 billion of real estate tax a year. Also, the individual parcels, the amount of taxation that you're talking about is generally not sufficient. There are no $100 million buildings in the city of Washington, right? There are no $1 million buildings in the city of Washington. Washington is an incredibly depressed area. They don't have the same kind of huge commercial space that we have. Additionally, because they don't fill the entire county, all of their Walmarts, everything else are located in South Canton Township. So there is no plaintiff, and there is no real incentive on the part of the bar to find a plaintiff in these cities. Similarly, if you look at the city of McKeesport in Allegheny County, the economic circumstances in McKeesport are dire. You do not have anyone with a sufficient interest to pay the freight on this thing. Nobody is going out to pay their lawyer to invalidate their $1,500 a year tax bill, on their $50,000 property in the third-class city of McKeesport. It's just not happening. Here in the city of Philadelphia, you have a much greater incentive for one person to come in just based on their own taxes. If you have a $100 million building in the city of Philadelphia, and you are then paying, of course, $1.5 million in taxes, and you say to yourself, look, if I spend $10,000 or $20,000 or $30,000 trying to invalidate my $1.5 million tax bill, the return on your investment is staggering. It's absolutely staggering. And so there's just so much of a greater incentive here. Now, the other thing that I think is important to keep in mind is just because no case has been litigated to the end doesn't mean that no case has been brought in any of these jurisdictions. If you look, some of the jurisdictions that have had this bifurcated millage only had it for a single year. Uniontown and Oil City had it for very short periods of time. So you have to ask yourself, was that in response to a lawsuit in those places? After seeing that lawsuit, was the determination made that they would lose? Did they instead voluntarily relinquish this? Now, we don't know. We don't know either way. But I don't think it's safe to say that the challenge has never been brought. All that we know for sure is the challenge has never been fully litigated.
Right, and the fact that it's been never fully litigated, I think, raises the question of whether it's unconstitutional from a uniformity clause, that what the outcome of what you stated in reference to Oil City, and I would also venture similar to Pittsburgh, was as a settlement of not going forward with the litigation. There was a decision to abandon land value tax, and that was an outcome between parties, not a determination by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that a land value tax is in violation of the uniformity clause, even though you can make an argument that they may go in that direction based on the Valley Forge Towers case, but that's not determinative. And as you know, a Supreme Court body, can change or vacillate in their positions over time. In reference to the statutory authority issue, my understanding, and this follows up on what Mr. Breslin stated, that it's the position, I think, you, Mr. Wakefield, and others in the law department, that in order for a jurisdiction in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to be able to institute a land value tax, it has to be explicitly stated by authority from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Yes, that is correct. So all taxation, even in home rule cities in Pennsylvania, is still at the permission of the General Assembly. So we have the Sterling Act and the Little Sterling Act here in Philadelphia. In the rest of the state, you have what's called the Local Tax Enabling Act. Every tax that a municipality, whether it be a borough, city of the second class, city of the third class, Philadelphia passes, has to comport with the authorizing legislation by the General Assembly. Because the General Assembly has reserved the power to regulate taxation to itself. And so the General Assembly has given specific grants of authority to do this sort of bifurcated millage or split, however you want to call it, land value tax, explicitly in the second-class city code, and explicitly in the third-class city code. And then there's a different version of it in the borough code, which allows for a distinction between farmland and non-farm. Because they have granted these specific authorizations in certain sections of the code, and it is silent in other codes, the general canons of statutory interpretation are that where a specific grant has been given to one subset of counties or boroughs or cities and has not explicitly been granted another subset, that the court will read that as the legislature's intention that the excluded boroughs or cities do not have that authorization. And they said, basically, it's a canon of statutory interpretation that the court is not supposed to go and find reasons to allow us to do these things. If the General Assembly wants us to do them, then the General Assembly can opine that it wants the city of Philadelphia to do the sovereignty.
And I think that interpretation from the perspective of when we time and that was interested in this conversation from Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, this really tax the city for so their argument is that organization is not allocated.
I agree with that. To have this exception, also have federal authorization. The general word itself just does not have need to give authorization. That's not that we have others.
And the conference police, so or with that regard, I will open it up to any members of council if they would like to ask questions. I don't want this to become a law review exercise between myself and Mr. Wakefield with Mr. Breslin sprinkled in, who plays a lawyer on Microsoft Teams when we have these conversations, but in his normal job as a revenue commissioner. Councilmember Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you guys were enjoying that a little too much. So my question is, again, you guys have debated the litigation, whether it can happen, whether it could not happen. Is the administration opposed to looking at what a land value tax proposition would look like in the city? As we all know, many times council has come up with different policy changes, and we have successfully worked with Harrisburg. I think some of members who were former House members would say we've been successful in getting authorization from the state to do things differently, cigarette tax, a bunch of other things. So is the administration totally opposed to saying, let's look at this given where we are as we're fixing our assessment process?
I would think that, on behalf of the administration, I, voiced the risks, and so that's the main concern. But the administration is open to work with council and to dive deeper, I'm sure, into this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to honor and respect the time and our other colleagues who are waiting in queue. Thank you so much for bringing this issue up, Chair, and we should continue this conversation because I think it's a trigger as we again fix our assessment process. It's another tool that we need to figure out if we pushed it, if we needed to advocate for it, how would it create more equitable city in the city of Philadelphia. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Breslin and Mr. Wakefield. I don't see additional questions for this panel. We will now go into the next panel on this resolution. Mr. Iannusa, if you could call Steve Mullen and Joshua Vincent, and actually if there's any other witnesses that would like to testify on this resolution, if you could state your name after Mr. Vincent testifies so we can conclude all the witnesses for this resolution for this afternoon.
Mr. Chair, we also have Ben Shee who signed up to testify.
If we can add Mr. Shea as well to this panel. Do we have Mr. Mullen or Mr. Vincent?
Josh Vincent here.
Okay, and I don't see Mr. Mullen.
Yep, Steve Mullen. Hi.
Okay, we'll start with Mr. Mullen, Mr. Vincent, Mr. Shea, and then any other individuals that would like to testify. After Mr. Shea testifies, please come on to the hearing with your picture and state your name for the record. We'll begin with Mr. Mullen and enjoy the picture and the great greenery behind you.
Plenty of oxygen in here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my name is Stephen Mullen. I'm principal with eConsult Solutions, and I've been asked to testify here. Thoughts, I think, on the in the world of what's the what kind of applications and with the land value tax, might it be a good policy of sort of for overall growth and development and fairness and equity. I will note I was asked to talk about recent past experience, and being an oldster, I don't know how far back that goes, but I've been a fan of land value tax in concept and in some form of its practice since the early 1980s when I was budget director for the city of St. Louis. City at the time, and continues to be in the throes of economic and fiscal decline, and the city used huge tax abatements. They used to have 10 full years and 15-year half tax abatement, 25 years of tax abatement to stave off almost complete disinvestment inside the city limits. When I came here in 1992 as the city's finance director in the Rendell administration, I knew of Pennsylvania sort of known as one of the few states that allowed differential assessment or differential tax rates for land versus improvements. And Philadelphia was still in an economic and population decline and had to use incentives to encourage investment and economic activity inside the city limits. And some know I switched to the Commerce Director position in late 1993, and at the time we didn't have tax. We had a tax abatement program, but it was very small and used in commercial uses here. And I will also note too, even if everybody said let's use land value tax, our property tax assessment system in those days could not generate reliable assessments of the land, reliable assessment of what is the land and what is the improvement value there. So it seemed to be more of a theoretical exercise at that time. I'm familiar with the history of land value taxation and its promoters over the years, sometimes who stopped just short of saying it'll cure everything, including the common cold. Here, advocates today, and you'll hear from my fellow panelists here, are not that out front here, but rather carefully consider the various advantages and disadvantages of land value taxation. One big question I've had through my years of looking at this has been: is this an alternative or a complement to tax abatement? Do you need one, or do you not have one as tax abatement? Does tax abatement get you tax abatement programs sort of get you what you were getting in land value taxation, or vice versa? And I think it's both, especially in a world where you're not doing full land value taxation. So the care must be taken when developing any actual program. I have to note here that that Frank and Steve in the previous panel here, I was scratching my head because I didn't recall frankly, I'm sure I never really knew the legal side of this and whether you could or couldn't. But in the assumption that it is possible, I think I'm a person who's in favor of a version of that of land value taxation. And the first thing you need is accurate and trustworthy property assessment. When I say trustworthy, it's trust that people basically trust that you have the land value apportioned of the overall parcel well. And I know a lot of people think that we don't have that yet. I know nobody thought we had it back in the 1990s and before there. But I think we do have a pretty good system so far, at least one where we're very, very close. And I'm generally in favor of implementing a partial land value tax program, and that is basically phasing in a more heavily weighted land component each year and adjusting the millage rates there until you might have sort of 1.5 to 2 times the land weighting compared to improvements. I think that would, if we were able to implement that, pass and implement that, if that would, if combined with certain regulatory changes and zoning changes, lead to significant increases in capital investment in the city's commercial and residential building base, and meaning greater supply, and especially I think it would have a very positive impact, though not solve the our major league problem with affordable housing and the housing supply for all citizens of Philadelphia. I was also asked about if I thought if we had something like that, would there have been a different pandemic impact compared to what we've observed? And I know that I'm sure everybody on board here right now have heard policy experts point out how cities that rely more on the property taxes fare better than after the pandemic or during the pandemic than Philadelphia with its heavy dose of business and wage taxes. My response to that is no kidding. Tell me something that's something not quite so obvious, number one. And number two, the impact part is we don't know what the impact yet is on property tax revenues. It obviously wasn't immediate here because the revenues, the taxes were assessed before, and they don't change. The base doesn't change dramatically here. But I do think that we'll see some significant reductions in assessments here in Philadelphia, especially commercial, office, and retail. I'm not sure if that negative impact will be greater for land or for buildings, and how that impact is constrained due to zoning restrictions. But I do believe that the assessment, a higher assessment on land, will allow the economic benefits of growth in the city here to be spread. The positive externality of somebody down at the end of my block fixing up things and investing makes my property more valuable. And so I like that. I'm a fan of that, of being able to account for that in some way, shape, or form. That's, I'll stop there.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Vincent.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to my panelist, Steve Mullen. I'm Josh Vincent. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for the Study of Economics. We were started in 1926 by several city council members, mayors, and the future governor of Pennsylvania, David Lawrence. And they started this organization to look at the program and see if it works in other places. A little bit of housekeeping, if I may respond to the law department. Scranton and Pittsburgh were both given permission to do the bifurcated tax in the second-class code. However, in the 1970s, late 1970s, both cities took advantage of the home rule municipality clause, and that's when they expanded their land value tax beyond the ratio that had been mandated. I should also mention that Harrisburg is trying to get its school district to enact land value tax, and in fact, 8 school districts can enact land value tax, and 2 have. And in 1997, Governor Ridge signed legislation allowing boroughs to enact a land value tax in which farmland is not included in the land value tax. So that's just a little bit of housekeeping. So LVT is been around for a long time, and there are some cities that have tried it. There are some cities that have pulled back on it. And the reason for that is actually against my organization's advice. Uniontown went almost whole hog the first year. And my predecessor warned that people will come after you. And yeah, that's what happened. The tax rate was too high. Too much revenue was coming from land so that nobody could prepare. Many diverse communities in Pennsylvania use LVT. And we've helped with the Pennsylvania experience. States such as Connecticut, Maryland, and Virginia have expanded the option for cities to enact land value tax. So I'm working right now in collaboration with the Center for Property Tax Reform. I hope some of you maybe attended our webinar some months ago, where we dove deep into the data using GIS and current assessments to figure out what the impact of a land value tax would be. So land value tax, and I don't want to repeat what's been said, but it's a fiscal tool and a reform that increases the mill rate on land and decreases the mill rate on buildings. So in many ways, Philadelphia, in this environment of crisis, health crisis, and economic crises, can lead the country in economic and social innovation. LVT addresses the need for economic reform that we need in this city so that all people can take part in the growth of themselves and the community. So while Philadelphia struggles with past and current financial crises, LVT can really play a role in, frankly, plugging the hole in the dike, the revenue hole. I'd like to actually reference, I did submit testimony, but I'd like to reference Mr. Mullen's commentary on the stability of the property tax. And in the 2022 budget, the mayor presented a section of a Pew Charitable Trust study that essentially says Philadelphia is right behind Detroit as far as the general budget shortfall in 2021. And interestingly, at the bottom of that list is Boston. Boston is on pretty even keel. And as Mr. Mullins said, they get about 78% of all of their tax revenue from the property tax. Not a land value tax, but a property tax nevertheless. And we could do worse to just strengthen the property tax as it's already used. So the ongoing effects of COVID-19, unemployment, and personal and business crises show that inherent weakness in our tax structure. So looking forward, the mayor's budget, and I know the city controller has put out some forecasts on tax revenues, are both pretty clear. And this played out in New York City and many other cities that we've been working with. The other taxes cratered after COVID. Sales tax, business tax, and other taxes. As in Philadelphia, the property tax, even under the worst case scenario, as envisioned by the controller's office, is going to see no change in property tax revenues. And I'm not saying there won't be, because assessments always take time to catch up with reality. But I think it could give us some breathing room. So what would a land value tax achieve? Well, the relative slowness of OPA assessment timeframes, the transition of many properties away from the 10-year tax abatement, and the inherent lack of progressivity in the current property tax, and indeed all taxes in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, call for change, modest at the outset. This is a process, and it can take years for a city to get where it wants with the land value tax or any other tax reform. So currently, Philadelphia collects 25 cents of every property tax dollar from land, which is the most immovable subject of taxation that exists. And that 75 cents from buildings serves clearly as a disincentive and repellent to a buyer, a builder, and most important, the longtime homeowner. Partnering with the Robert Schalkenbach Foundation and the Center for Property Tax Reform, we've provided data-driven tax results, tax incident studies, and property class code outcomes in a scalable perspective. In other words, what would happen if there was no tax on buildings? What would happen if there was no tax on land? Each of those revenue options are studied. And we have a very good GIS crew that did that for us. So the debate about the 10-year tax abatement has often provided more heat than light. While rigorous study demonstrated the effectiveness of the abatement, it worked, public perception focused on the tale of two cities. And essentially, why shouldn't long-term homeowners and small businesses without abatements, why shouldn't they be similarly rewarded by their physical and fiscal efforts with a tax break on buildings? LVT abates all buildings from the tax bill, from taxation with no discriminatory treatment from property to property. The city can facilitate the expiration of 10-year tax abatements to people enjoying the abatement by reducing the importance of building value in the property tax bill. We have many abated properties coming off the abatement, and they will probably freak out once they realize what their tax bill is going to be. We can address that ahead of time by simply de-emphasizing the building portion of the property tax. The status quo in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, our tax systems are regressive. Wage taxes that fall flat across all income levels and magnified, of course, in Philadelphia. Pennsylvania's high corporate income tax rate makes Philadelphia's net and gross business receipts taxes more ill-advised. So the Levy-Sweeney proposal, which gained some traction a few years back, their prescription was to change the uniformity clause to move towards a higher property tax on non-residential property. And that would be a very heavy lift, and I think it misses some key details. Everybody's thinking about the skyscrapers and the higher tax that will come from them. But thrown into that basket are barbershops, bodegas, bars, restaurants, and corner shops. They're non-residential too. They're not parasitic capitalists. They're people trying to make it in a neighborhood, like a lot of small businesses. So we believe that we've shown the progressivity of the tax. In my testimony, I provided the LVT outcome by value quintiles. In other words, the more low-valued a property's total value, the more it benefits from land value taxation, which fits theory. And you can examine that. And it plays out across all property code descriptions, from residential to commercial to multifamily, et cetera. And of course, vacant land, which does not serve the city unless it's for a public purpose, like a garden. Vacant land doesn't do anything except reduce property values and for surrounding areas, and provides an incentive for people to sit on lots for years, which is ongoing. So yeah, the property tax for vacant land would go up about 92% across all value quintiles. But I'm going to get to the crux of what will happen. We've been looking at this in Philadelphia from 1988 to, I think the last chat was in 2006. In other words, both pre-AVI and post-AVI. And the effect on property tax codes has shifted somewhat into a progressive outcome, as I referenced above. And vacant land post-AVI finally appears, as Mr. Mullins said, to assume some of its fair share, at least in taxation. What's going to happen with LVT? Well, we have 6 categories of property, and all of them save except for industrial and vacant land. Industrial is understandable because there's not much industry left, and it just is good for commercial, which is a big change from the past debates. Commercial property owners should be pleased with this, particularly small business. So I urge we go forward to explore this. There's no ifs, ands, or musts, but the legal issue, I think, can be dealt with, but I'm not an attorney. So I want to thank you very much, everybody, and the Center for Property Tax Reform.org. Go on to the page, and I have my colleagues standing by if you have other questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Shi, and then anyone else that would like to testify on this matter.
All right, can you hear me?
We can.
All right, cool. Yes, thank you, Council, for allowing me to testify. My name is Benjamin Shi. I am testifying on behalf of a bunch of urban advocates from Fifth Square about the issue of implementing land value taxation in Philadelphia. While I defer to my much more knowledgeable panel colleagues on the more technical aspects of LVT, I would like to add some aspects to the local situation here in Philadelphia on a political basis that I think really explain the deep need for an LVT here. Firstly, I'd like to comment a bit about the situation with OPA's assessments and how it has affected the way we fundamentally value property in the city. A few years ago, the city controller released a report in 2019 about the accuracy of OPA's assessments, and it found that that there was a huge discrepancy created by OPA with land valuation. It found that land values are, quote, not set not based on a property's location or lot size, but rather using a method that lies outside of the generally accepted best practices for land valuation. And also that these findings do not necessarily translate to land values for vacant properties as well. Given that their actual value initiative was supposed to more fairly address assessments, it seems that the results when it happens to valuation on land were plainly out of whack. And there was an example where in one single block in North Philadelphia, the land assessments ranged all the way from about a couple of single value dollars per square foot, maybe $8 per square foot, all the way to $30 a square foot, just on the same row house block. And given that that Philadelphia already assesses land as 25% of the total property tax value, this already represents a huge miscalculation in how we can fairly assess property tax. And what LVT would do would essentially be to really simplify the way that OPA now has to calculate property value. If you switch most of that valuation from improved properties, condition of the property, the density of the house or structure, away from that and towards a much more uniform analysis of land, then OPA is able to gain much more uniformity and much less objections to the assessed value for each property owner. And this would not rely on the L&I records, obviously, for the condition of the property and its density, and solely on the characteristics of land. And this ensures much more equitable assessments. It could also relieve assessments on owners in many disenfranchised and middle-income minority neighborhoods, because with that adjusted valuation, you can then go ahead and value much more highly the red hot and directly target the red hot center city properties and properties in booming neighborhoods, especially those with vacant lots that remain deeply undervalued. This also would ensure, obviously, that speculators of land who are holding on vacant properties and parking lots do pay their fair share, and it would also hugely relieve the burden on owner occupants and LVT's effects upon the 10-year tax abatement, which has certainly been a hot topic among the progressive contingent in City Council about its potential, total abolition and phase out. LVT would present the only solution that would both address the progressive concern about the 10-year tax abatement, while still encouraging owners of vacant land to redevelop their properties. Currently tax abatement holders, they already get to enjoy OPA's under assessment of land values while paying nothing in improved property tax because of the abatement. It is essentially an incentive, an extra incentive upon already existing values to develop their property. But if you switch to a proper land value tax, then the city would instead impose a disincentive on landowners to not develop their property and to leave it vacant, essentially saying that if you're leaving it vacant, you'll still have to pay the land value tax anyway, and so you're basically just losing money by not developing it. And so this would simultaneously encourage the type of development that the city is trying to encourage with the abatement, while also ensuring that we do not have to mess with exemptions or abatements anymore for any other purpose, solely for stimulating development. In effect, everyone would get the same year tax abatement on the improved property value by shifting everyone's tax bill solely to land value and be a much more equitable and fair assessment. I also like to echo Mr. Vincent's comments on the levy sweeping plan and about how they went about, trying to get their plan adopted. Obviously, it didn't go anywhere because of the roadblock of the uniformity clause, which obviously does present a huge roadblock. But with the multiple examples of second and third class cities, implementing their form of split rate land value taxation, which is essentially what the Philadelphia could do. We are asking, we see that this can be used to directly address differential land valuation between different types of property through their zoning. For example, if it's zoned commercial or zoned industrial, and so we can worry less about what's being built on top of that zoning, and worry solely about land which still reflects many aspects of the levy Sweeney plan. And if the mantra of that plan was to tax what can move as to oppose what can move, then the land value tax does go one step further in taxing what is intrinsically permanent and unchanging to the city, which is the land and the value of it. And so I'd like to thank Council again for allowing me to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shi. Is there anyone else here to testify for this panel? I do have just some additional questions that is just interesting in reference to the conversation regarding the land value tax for both Mr. Mullen and also for Mr. Vincent, but I know we are somewhat pressed for time today, and we'll continue to delve into these conversations. But I will say, Mr. Vincent, when you responded to some of the questions that were raised by the law department, you made reference to school districts who are now looking to do land value tax. In those jurisdictions that have school districts that are looking to do a land value tax, from your understanding, have they received explicit authorization from the General Assembly to implement a land value tax?
Yes, but it was very targeted. Aliquippa is a very depressed place, and they voted to turn from a borough into a third-class city. They liked LVT, but the land value tax did not apply to the school district. However, they found a way by permitting school districts, their third class, coterminous with third class cities, to enact a land value tax. So Aliquippa and Clairton both have that. So, of course, in Philadelphia, the school tax is a unified tax. It's a unified county. And so that actual problem should not come up.
Okay. Well, definitely, there's much more work that needs to be done regarding this conversation. I know in talking with Councilman Sanchez, we were looking at how we could additionally study this concept, both from addressing some of the legal issues that have been raised by the law department, but also the challenges of the implementation. But my understanding from both of you in your testimony, well, all three of you from your testimony, that this is something that if we were to implement, we'll have to do it over a period of time in order to make a transition not impact negatively on constituents within the city of Philadelphia. And that gets to be the advice that you would give for any jurisdiction that's looking to introduce a land value tax to their city.
Yep, take it slow.
I agree.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you all three for your. Mr. Mullen, you have a follow-up point.
Mr. Chair, if I could, every once in a while, let's kind of get an opportunity to deal with former students on things like a panel together. And I have to say, Mr. Shi, I was glad to see, and I felt very comfortable with the fact that I gave him an A in public policy a couple of years ago. So great to have him on the panel with me.
All right. Well, since we started this part of the hearing having a almost law review type perspective, I'm glad we're now able to shift into a public policy graduate level focus. But I want to thank all of you for your testimony. Are there any other witnesses here regarding this resolution that would like to testify? Seeing and hearing none, I want to thank all of.
I would like to. I'm sorry.
Okay. This is Ms. Foss. Okay, I had you list. If you could just state your name for the record and then proceed with your testimony. And we are well over our committed time period of hours of 1 o'clock. So if you could be somewhat a brief summation of your testimony, because we are have another committee that was supposed to start at 1 o'clock. So thank you.
I will be brief. Yes, my name is Josie Foss. I'm the executive director of the Robert Schockenbach Foundation and the co-director of the Center for Property Tax Reform, a colleague of Josh's. I only wanted to interject some very recent research findings just to get them onto City Council's radar as you're thinking about this policy. So Josh mentioned in his testimony that Philadelphia is lagging behind Detroit in terms of budget shortfalls. Detroit is actually looking at a land value tax as well, assisted by the Lincoln Institute for Land Policy, and they've done some very recent studies of the Pennsylvania experience. And so I just wanted to be sure that the findings of those studies, which are focused on these cities and towns that already have a land value tax or a split rate tax, are known to City Council. So they kind of fall into three categories, and I'll be very brief. Desirable development is the one that I'll tackle first. Infill development is seen in the municipalities that implement these tax policies. In the first decade after implementation, they see an increase in density of between 2 and 10 percentage points. That is relative to neighboring jurisdictions that do not use these policies. Reductions in land speculation. That makes sense because basically you're telling land speculators that they're no longer going to be getting a break on their taxation. They're going to be paying full freight on the value of land. That incentivizes people to resell and redevelop. In that same vein, new construction. Significant and statistically significant amounts of new building permits are pulled immediately following the passage of these tax policies. A lot of those permits are to build new homes. So 5 percentage point increase in the first year of new home construction in these places. And the homes that are being built are what I would describe as right size. So they are infill development by and large, and they are of the same character and size as the existing neighborhoods. The next category is benefits to residents. Lower taxes overall. Josh spoke to that. That's something in our original analysis of Philadelphia data, we saw that as well, but that has played out over and over in the places that use these taxes. Increased tax progressivity. Again, we've shown it, or we've seen it in the numbers for Philly, but that's been seen elsewhere in the state as well. Reduced property tax delinquency, which makes sense. As your bill goes down, you're better able to pay, less likely to go into foreclosure or tax arrears. Increased home values relatively immediately. In the jurisdictions using these taxes, the increases in the first year have been between 2.3 and 8.9%. Increased home ownership. As people see their tax bills go down, more renters transition into home ownership. And then the last category I'll touch on, and then I'm done, are benefits for business. So increased business formation is very frequently observed in the towns and cities that use these taxes. Between 60 and 107 new businesses started in the first year. As others have noted, Philadelphia is a much larger jurisdiction. So I think it's reasonable to think that the city would see business increases at the high end or perhaps even outside of that range. Increased commercial market values for property. So in the first year, about 10.6% increase in commercial property values. And then the last thing that I will mention is that these tax policies favor capital intensive businesses. So we're talking about retail, wholesale, manufacturing, transportation, and construction. These businesses also tend to benefit from agglomeration economies. So that kind of sharing of knowledge and resources, which also lends itself to a vibrant urban core. That's my testimony. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your testimony. I just want to thank all of the panels that testified on this resolution, as well as all the panels that testified for today's Finance Committee hearing. It was quite lengthy, but we dealt with a number of important issues, not only in reference to development through our city using the Neighborhood Preservation Initiative, but also discussing the idea of providing a land value tax. And now that I know that some of the other cities are looking at this based on Mr. Vincent's testimony and Ms. Foss's testimony, I will reach out to some of my colleagues through the National League of Cities and Democratic municipal officials to get their perspective on this type of initiative and how it could possibly be helpful for their jurisdiction. With that, that concludes the business for the Committee on Finance for today. I want to thank all of my colleagues for attending and participating in this hearing and having this conversation regarding important matters regarding the future growth of the city of Philadelphia. Thank you for being here this morning and into the afternoon, and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you.